You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
The true story of a Hollywood legend, Ed Wood.
And action!
He made movies like no one else.
I want to keep moving. You've got to get through that door. Ah, that was perfect.
Perfect.
Do you know anything about film production?
Well, I'd like to think so.
He had an eye for talent.
I met Bela Lugosi.
I thought he was dead.
This is the most uncomfortable coffin I've ever been in.
No, he's very much alive.
With the swiftness of a deadly cosmic ray, the Earth is invaded by indestructible moon monsters. Their ghastly mission, death for all humans. What astounding technical developments are being made to protect mankind? Robot Monster brings you an actual preview of the devastating forces of our future.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature Grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our unrated Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we are breaking the rules and going into the 21st century, so join that sleaze.
We've been doing a little bit too much lately, but don't worry, it's coming to an end shortly. But we also decide on all the official ratings and rankings of every film that we cover over there. And Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for 7 years. There's like 180, maybe even 190 bonus episodes at this point, as well as our bonus transmission series, which we're running up on 60, where we talk about new release genre movies as well over there. So if you haven't made the jump yet, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we had a bunch of people to give their shout outs here. We had Weston Clark sign up, Pressed Plastic, Joshua Klein, Seth Michael, Robert Tredget, Audrey C., Eduardo Veladez, Ian McKinney, Jeremiah Holt, Tom, Luke, Bay 1000, Max Pomerantz, Valera Nightblood, Mike Harmon, Sam Silva, and last but not least, Eric Bolter. So thanks so much to all of you folks. Hope you're enjoying all those bonus episodes. We appreciate that support.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
The other plug, as always, is why am I screwing up the intro, man? What's going on with me today? This is our time. Merch, that's right. Jamie's got the save for me here. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you folks can think of. You guys have gotten notebooks, you've gotten hoodies, you've gotten coffee mugs. That link is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. And Jamie actually didn't even give me the right one. Dude, we forgot Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, damn it, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And that is all of the plugs for the week, and that is it for the intro. Welcome back. I am your host, as always, Josh Lewis. Joining me also, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over here on the main feed would have heard from us, where we would have had a special guest, Perry Rulland, back on the show to give us another Perry Shows Us Weird Shit corner double feature of Japanese filmmaker Gakuryu Ishii's atmospheric psychiatry horror procedural Angel Dust from 1994, which for anyone who is a fan of Kiyoshi Kurosawa's films like Cure or Pulse, it was felt like a hugely inspirational movie for him. He even hired the production designer from the film, so it was fun to talk about that. And Perry just happened to pair it with one of the most baffling and bizarre pieces of accidental experimental outsider art we have ever talked about on this show, Mark Region's After Last Season from 2009, which we made an exception for Perry so that he could melt our brains.
Yeah, it's truly just it is brain melting. That is exactly how I would describe it. It has one animated sequence in particular that is kind of uncanny and creepy, but the rest of it will be up to you whether or not it works. I will say that.
Yeah, and whether it costs $5 million or not is also up to
those special
you.
effects. They're expensive. I guess.
Nobody could quite tell, but that was what we talked about 2 weeks ago over on the main feed, if you haven't heard it yet. And then last week over on the Patreon feed, exclusively for the patrons, we decided that we were going to finally, I mean, he's come up in conversation before. We've never dedicated an episode to this man. We were going to discuss the legendary 70s exploitation actor, Joe Don Baker, who recently passed away. And we did a double feature of him in the 70s working with aging Hollywood tough guy directors. We talked to Don Siegel's heist noir Charlie Varick from 1973, where he co-starred with Walter Matthau. And we paired it with Phil Carlson's very ugly regional revenge film follow-up to Walking Tall, a movie called Framed from 1975, which ended up being his last movie. And what a ugly movie to go out on.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, specifically, there's a stunt in Framed that apparently Film Twitter has retweeted many times, but it is incredible. It looks so dangerous.
Jamie's not online enough to know, so
No.
I was like, Jamie, I'm not spoiling it for you. I got to let him just be like, experience it, not knowing when it was coming.
Yeah, it's Jackie Chan levels of danger. It's crazy. It doesn't look like on purpose entirely either, which makes it even worse, but better at the same time. So yeah, it's and to see Baker's two sides with both of those movies is really cool. He's always like, rough and tough, but the other one, he's more heroic.
You get wronged every man going for revenge, and then just like pure sadistic heavy. You get kind of two sides of Texas legend, Mr. Joe Don Baker. So again, if you haven't heard that episode, that was last week over on the Patreon feed. But moving on to this week, we are joined by a very special returning guest. We are always happy to have on. He is a film critic, he's an author, he's a podcaster, and he is most importantly our resident Ed Wood and Tim Burton correspondent, who has a new book coming out soon called Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. And literally the second my DMs blew up with, I'm writing an Ed Wood book, I was like, your slot is booked on the podcast. I don't know when it's coming out. I have, I don't even know how many chapters you've got done, but this guy is coming on. And that guest is Toronto's own Will Sloan. Will, welcome back.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really glad to hear your Joe Don Baker pilled on this podcast. I mourned him a few weeks ago like a member of the family, and so glad to hear some respect for him. Framed is such a beautiful film. But if I can give the listeners just a little bit of the sausage making, when you write a book for a publisher, you are often contractually obliged to give them promotional ideas. To talk to them about, promoting the book, which, in a perfect world, I would have no part in that. But as part of that process, sometimes you have to give them ideas of influencers and podcasters who might be interested. And I thought, okay, who do I know? Oh, well, I know Josh and Jamie from Sleazoids. Maybe they'd be interested in. And so, when I was hanging out with Josh recently, Josh, who I've known for years, I've been invited to his wedding. And Josh said to me, "Oh, your publicist got in touch with me." And I thought, oh, that's great. I really feel like I've arrived at this moment. Josh can communicate with me through my publicist.
She sent me a whole author, but she's like, have you heard of Will Sloan? This guy,
that's right.
Is he something or is he something? And he would, would you be interested in having him on your show? And I was like, yeah, I'll fucking message him.
so that's
I will
great.
text this man.
Yeah. I just want you to know who you're dealing with here, Josh.
Yeah, Mr. Big Time, Mr. Big Time. No, it's incredible. Will, obviously, you've been very a vocal man about Ed Wood online for a very long time. It's finally, pen to paper. It's finally being published. Did you ever think when you first got into Ed Wood that you would be, he would be a subject of a book that you wrote?
No, and I often wish I could go back and tell my 13-year-old self that I would be arriving at this moment. But my 13-year-old self maybe is still inside me. I'm ecstatic that this is happening, and I'm happy that I can go on the publicity trail to talk about it as well.
Yeah, no, and we're, we've actually had you on the show to talk about Ed Wood before, which is how that we've known that, you've been deep into the Ed Wood minds for a very, very long time, and, been bringing on the ones that, are unfinished pornos that you can hardly see or hear and, describe to other people with words. And we've done that with you. So, it feels like, a very great culmination that you finally hit this point. But as we do on this show, we're going to talk about 2 movies here. And there was one glaring one that we were like, we haven't done it yet. We've set it up. We've talked about Ed Wood. We've done a number of Ed Wood episodes on this show now. We've actually done a number of Tim Burton episodes on the show, mostly also with you. Oh, yeah. So what 2 films are we talking about today, Will?
We're talking about 1994's Ed Wood, which I couldn't believe you'd never done this. And I'm glad you're getting to it. And because I've talked a lot about Ed Wood, I thought maybe it might be fun to talk about another golden turkey, a movie that's brought up in conversation with Ed Wood by a director who was a sort of colleague of Ed Wood's, and a film that Ed Wood himself kind of looked down on, 1953's Robot Monster.
That's awesome.
Trying to imagine Ed Wood just like getting snooty to someone.
I love that. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, I cannot wait to hear some of the details of how exactly he was a colleague of Phil Tucker's. But yeah, no, Ed Wood, we have not covered the actual film, and it is, it has been one of my favorite Tim Burton films for a long time, precisely because I think that, Tim Burton was one of the guys on the early train of, trying to kind of correct the story and the reputation, I think, of Ed Wood. And we'll get into the details of exactly how he did that. I'm excited for Will to actually update me on some of as a historian of Ed Wood to let me know what it is that Tim Burton is streamlining and maybe exaggerating. And it's a pretty sentimental, pretty friendly depiction of the man, but definitely one that I think has stood the test of time. I was rewatching it and I was like, man, Tim Burton was once capable of making movies that made you feel this way and looked this good.
I know almost every time I see a new Tim Burton movie, with the caveat that I sort of enjoyed Beetlejuice too. I'm not going to make any great claims for it, but I had a good enough time. But most times when I see a new Tim Burton movie, I think to myself, like, God, was there anything there ever? Because like he used to be talked about as this great visual stylist, and he's not even really that anymore. But yeah, you watch Ed Wood and it just fires on all cylinders. It's beautiful. And I think it's a rich text, as they say, as Tim Burton's, tribute to a fellow artist. I think there's a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. And we're excited to do that with you here. So let's do that. Let's jump into Ed Wood.
You get all your friends to get baptized just so you can make a monster movie.
And his legacy that will live forever.
How do you burn this arm?
Shake his legs around. Looks like he's killing him.
Ah!
This is the one.
Strap her in! I command you!
This is the one I'll be remembered for.
Ed Wood, a Tim Burton film.
Really? Worst film you ever saw? Well, my next one will be better. Hello?
All right, we are talking Ed Wood, the 1994 biographical drama comedy directed by Tim Burton, written by Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, who loosely sort of streamlined their own treatment for, I guess, a documentary that became the 1991 nonfiction biography, Nightmare of Ecstasy, The Life and Art of Edward D. Wood Jr. by Rudolph Gray, and obviously starring Johnny Depp as the titular legendarily bad, quote-unquote, filmmaker during the making of 2 of his I guess actually 3 of his most well-known films, Glen or Glenda, Bride of the Monster, and Plan 9 from Outer Space, films that got him sort of pop culturally deemed the worst filmmaker of all time after his death in the 1980s, but whose life and artistry has been kind of critically reappraised, including in a new book by our guest today that you can pre-order in the description of this episode, by the way. Go do that while you're listening.
And we've covered Glen or Glenda and Plan 9, I believe.
We have. We did do an episode, and partially because Will was wanting to do the Ed Wood deep cuts. I actually think Will inspired that, and we were like, maybe on the Patreon we should do like the classics one. Let's do the ones that are kind of covered in the movie a little bit. And it was interesting. It had been so long since I had seen the Tim Burton movie that I actually forgot how many of the details we talked about on that episode when we were researching it were in the movie. And I was like, damn, I thought we were like, we were coming to some new insights about how singularly unique and passionate of an outsider artist he was and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wait, no, this was all in the movie. When I was rewatching it, I was like, damn, we didn't, Tim Burton beat us by a long time.
About 20 years. Yeah. 30 years.
So, but no, it was, I really loved going back to this movie specifically. It's our third time talking about Burton, whose background as a sort of graphic visual art and sort of hand-drawn and stop motion animation and sort of concept storyboarder for Disney is well known. And obviously he, has talked a lot about his love of sort of Universal monsters and Grimm fairy tales and Vincent Price movies and Dr. Seuss and Roald Dahl, and, had a commitment, especially early in his career, to these kind of gothic expressionist and surrealist sort of visual designs and old school animated physical comedy and incredible just in-camera analog effects. And, when we last spoke with Will, we did his sort of debut cartoon slapstick road movie version of Pee-wee, where he was tasked with doing all of that animated Rube Goldberg gag and sort of genre parody visual construction to match Paul Rubin's sort of manic and juvenile man-child persona. And then
apologies if I can interrupt for a second. I know that on that episode we talked about Pee-wee and Beetlejuice, and now we're talking about Ed Wood. And I assume that the third time you talked about Tim Burton was Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children.
That was it. We couldn't stop. We were like, well, that's just, it's a special text.
Dark Shadows.
Yeah, right, exactly. And both of those, I think, probably topped your year-end lists of whatever year they came out. So you've probably talked about them a lot at this point.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to keep going. There's still so much more untapped potential in, we got to hit Big Fish. We got to hit Big Eyes. That's a double feature right there.
Sure. I mean, if you run out of every other movie ever made, why not?
Yeah. That is the plan at some point. We will get there, I think.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Absolutely. Until then, we're going to stick around in the time period where my childhood affection for Tim Burton was born, which I will be honest was primarily through those first two Batman movies that he made. Because
me too.
As a kid, I wanted to see a Batman movie, and I was also in awe. Like even on VHS, I was looking at some of those, just those images and those sets and those costumes, and I was like, my God, I feel like early on in my life, it was one of the first times where I was like, someone made all this. Like someone directed this.
And also like when Batman Forever came out, I was 6 years old when it came out. And I feel like that was the first illustration to me of the fact that directors have a vision. It's like there's a difference between Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher. And that sort of opened up a whole like world of possibility for film as an art form. It feels a bit pretentious to say that about Batman Forever, but it happens to be the truth.
Hey, no, if you watch Batman Returns and you go right into Batman Forever, I think even a child would be like, these look a little different. There's something here, something's going on. The sets are getting even stranger. The colors are getting even more wild. And yeah, I don't know. It was like, that was kind of my relationship with Tim Burton. And I got to Ed Wood like a little bit later because I always kind of looked at it and I was like, oh, he made a biopic. He made a movie about like a guy who makes movies. I don't know. And now I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, it might just be like the only Tim Burton movie that like, makes me tear up and makes me happy. And I just throw scenes from it on when I want to feel good.
Yeah. But
I was going to say, Will,
Batman Returns for you, right? Is that the other?
It is, yeah. Those two. I mean, and it's no secret too that like those are the ones that I find Batman Returns was the one where he cared a little bit more about those characters, and he was like, I'm gonna make a weirdo melodrama out of these outsiders, and it felt like that was something that was really personal to him as an idea.
It does feel like similar to this, where he's kind of being like, look at these, the freaks that I identify with and I care about so much. So I love, that is kind of his career in general, I suppose.
If I can make the emotional case for Pee-wee, the scene at the end when he's at the drive-in and like all the friends he's made along the way are sort of saying hi to him.
That's true too. And that's heartwarming. It
goes from like, an ex-con to a biker, from that lady who wants to move to Paris to all of them. It's like, yeah, it's sweet. This strange man who has united all of these people. I don't know.
Another collection of misfits and outsiders that Tim Burton has, put together. This seems like the one thing he feels like, sort of emotionally passionate about.
Yeah. And that is the one thing I guess he's kept completely consistent with his with his style and his narratives. I wish they looked better, as we've already said. So we can.
I mean, who can forget? Who could forget all those peculiar children at Miss Peregrine's home? I mean, there was, sorry, it's on the tip of my tongue, all these characters. I'll get back to you on who they were.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, after that like pretty iconic run of movies that he went on, which honestly, I feel embarrassed to say that I put up there with like one of the best runs a director ever went on, which is Pee-wee into Beetlejuice, into Batman, into Edward Scissorhands, into Returns, into this. 6 movies in a row, that I love. And for me, it sucks because I don't really feel as strongly about pretty much anything after that. But that run is unbelievable. And obviously Edward Scissorhands is a big deal in the context of all of these because it is the Johnny Depp one. It was the one where he is going to be my goth, metallic fingered Frankenstein. He's going to hang out with Vincent Price. He got to hire Vincent Price, same way Ed Wood got to have a relationship late in life with Bela Lugosi. And, like the dude was on top of the world and making his most expensive movies with the Batman movies. And, I guess he already had a little bit of a soft spot for Ed Wood as someone that he viewed as a sort of weirdo outsider who loved movies and loved a similar era of movies to Burton as well, like old monster movies, old horror B movies. And, he saw a little bit of a, sort of a connection to him. But he got handed, I believe, Scott and Larry's treatment and script because it was being shopped for the Heathers director, and the producer of it was also Burton's producer. And, it ended up falling into his lap. And from what I understand, he basically dropped it all. That he was like, I am going to make this thing. He wasn't going to make it. And he was like, I'm going to make this thing. I don't care that the previous film from these writers is Problem Child and Problem Child 2 or whatever it was.
Figuring this out.
He saw all the work that those two guys put into compiling Ed Wood's like letters and interviews with friends and family and lifelong collaborators. And he saw just so much empathy for this guy and, and had an idea to make such a sort of gentle and heartwarming and kind of life-affirmingly optimistic movie out of a guy who, as we've talked about with Will multiple times on this show, later in life had to resort to writing and making porn and died in poverty, pretty raging alcoholic. And, there's a lot of really sad details to what ended up happening to Ed Wood. And I think part of what I love so much about Ed Wood is it's sort of there. It's sort of there in the Bela Lugosi arc of the movie when you see Ed Wood and his relationship to him and what Hollywood did to that man and that Hollywood legend. But for the most part, this movie does kind of operate from the point of view of we are going to kind of correct the narrative around this man because he died in relative obscurity. He got deemed the worst filmmaker of all time, in 1980. So 2 years kind of like after his death, and which is kind of what revived the cult following around his movies. And he spent a decade just being mocked. And, here were people who were like, there's a deeper, more affectionate story in here.
Right. And if I could correct the record just very slightly.
Yes. No, please correct every record. We have the Ed Wood historian here for a reason.
Because I agree wholeheartedly on an emotional level with everything you said. So the Medved brothers, Harry and Michael, did that book, the Golden Turkey Awards, where their readers, voted. They crowned Ed Wood the worst director of all time. And, they went on the road with their World's Worst Film Festival because, Plan 9 from Outer Space, played on TV throughout the 60s and 70s. So all these boomers saw it. And, among those boomers were Scott and Larry, the writers of this movie. And I think when they were at film school, just as a sort of class project of write a treatment for a documentary, they wrote a treatment called The Man in the Angora Sweater. They'd be like, okay, here would be the budget to make this movie. And they created all these sort of fake letters that were like, Lyle Talbot or Gregory Walcott or all these actors being like, oh, thank you for reaching out. I thought I'd been forgotten. I would love to be interviewed for your documentary. So Ed Wood was a subject of fascination for them. And then all the way throughout the 80s, there was this writer named Rudolph Gray who took Ed Wood very seriously. He didn't like what the Medveds did. He really respected Ed Wood as an artist. gravitated to the otherworldly strangeness of Ed Wood's movies. And he spent a decade, interviewing Ed Wood's friends and colleagues. And the result was this book that came out in 1991 or 1992 called Nightmare of Ecstasy, which is this incredible oral biography that, is told from the point of view of all of Ed Wood's friends, his life. And it's a harrowing read. It's full of great stories about filmmaking, but it also, goes into the depths of poverty with Ed Wood, and it ends on a real down note. And after the Problem Child experience, I guess Scott and Larry and also Tim Burton, they all had independently read this book, Nightmare of Ecstasy. And Scott and Larry, after the Problem Child experience, were like, why don't we just revive this Ed Wood idea? Why don't we try to adapt this book and turn it into a movie? And apparently they wrote the script in something like 6 weeks, because that was how long they could write it before Tim Burton committed to directing Mary Riley with Julia Roberts.
Yes.
And I think the challenge that they faced is, who wants to watch a movie about a bad artist who failed? And one of their ways around it is to just focus on the golden 1950s period, which Rudolph Gray doesn't do. He goes all the way, as I said, to, the depths of poverty with Ed Wood and his decline into alcoholism. Scott and Larry just focus on the 50s. And Tim Burton, I think, working with them, he kind of rescues Ed Wood from the reality of his life. From the opening scene, with the credits and with the Hollywood sign and everything, it kind of establishes that even though this movie is based on fact, it's not really to be taken completely literally. And I think it kind of ends with the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood ending. It ends with a drift into fantasy. Does, yeah. Yep. And I think there's a lot that's interesting about Tim Burton, who at this point is like one of the most successful Hollywood filmmakers of all time. I don't think that's an overstatement. He's made 2 Batman movies, going and making a biopic about one of the least successful Hollywood directors of all time, and both finding artistic kinship with him, but also there's an element of like, there but for the grace of God go I. And he's wrestling with that a little bit in how he kind of liberates Ed Wood from, the horror of his life.
Yeah, that was one thing I noticed right away too. Like you were mentioning, just the style that seems almost, it's like it's not trying to be grounded or realistic, which is also kind of built into the irony of the script, where Ed Wood constantly uses that as an excuse for mistakes, like where he's like, I want it to be realistic. It would actually take him several times to go through the door, things like that.
Right.
But with establishing almost like the what it looks like the camera goes into, and I don't know if it's just the way that it looks through the angle and the set that they make, but it looks like the camera actually goes into a miniature house, and then it goes through the window and then into an actual set where the Jeffrey Jones comes out of the coffin and everything. But just to establish that kind of like you're getting an introduction to a film, then you watch the Ed Wood biopic, you're automatically set up to think that you're not really watching something that's going to just be like, grounded in reality. The way that they show the decaying of his relationship has these like slapstick comedy beats where she's throwing a frying pan at his head and stuff like that.
Right.
So it never it always feels comedic, even when you're watching something like him lying to his girlfriend over and over again to try to get the budget for the film and things of that nature. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think the artificiality is like a huge thing that makes, that I think Will was spot on when he was saying that it's, he is, it's doing what a lot of the best biopics do, which is incorporating a knowledge and an appreciation of the subject and the artist and the type of energy and style they worked with, especially if you have artists who have like documented work like Ed Wood to sift through. I mean, we talked about this a lot when we talked about what Paul Schrader did on the Mishima film as well, where it was like, sometimes there's a deeper psychological and emotional truth to be found about them through replicating their work and using their style. And he declares that right from the opening, when it's like, here is a meta recreation of what, having Criswell do an introduction for Ed Wood's life would look like, the same way he would do an introduction for one of his films. And, the recreation itself is beautiful. It's obviously shot by Steven Zapsky, who did Edward Scissorhands and Batman Returns for Burton, shot beautiful black and white film, but also kind of just recreating a little bit of that, you know, in a more lavish, you know, there's more money in this film, but recreating some of that like kind of cheap gothic mid-century monochrome look, and doing, you know, recreating some of the starkness and the shadowy and some of the more sort of like kitschy sort of production design and costume design, and going into a miniature, because Ed Wood himself had to use a miniature of Hollywood when he had his little flying saucers on strings in Plan 9 going around. But it's kind of using the techniques that you feel like Ed Wood would have loved to do if he had ever been given money.
I think the thing that I like most about the movie is the sort of implicit compliment that Tim Burton pays Ed Wood of drawing direct inspiration from Ed Wood's style and trying to synthesize.
This is what he was going for.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to synthesize his own very distinctive style with Ed Wood's, and sort of there's an implication that he's taking Ed Wood seriously as an artist, which I find very likable. And on this viewing, I, of course, thought a bit about James Franco's The Disaster Artist, which obviously takes a lot of inspiration from this film, and which nobody has seen since 2017. I don't know if you guys saw it. But I think the two movies are a sort of useful compare and contrast exercise, because obviously, Tim Burton's movie is better. They're both cases of very successful filmmakers looking at very unsuccessful filmmakers, and there's a kind of attraction repulsion to that. But I don't think, they both kind of come to the same conclusion about, well, good or bad, at least they made a movie. And
they made the movie.
And have you made a movie? Yeah, you haven't made a movie. But I think, like, ultimately James Franco's movie is a little bit more, it's less respectful of Wiseau. Yeah. Understandably so. I mean, Wiseau is kind of a bad person, but he does. But actually, like, James Franco's movie, I also think looks terrible. Like, I think it's a bad piece of filmmaking. So it's I don't know.
It doesn't capture anything like this does when it comes to a sense of style or saying anything about the filmmaker itself. It seems more like a mockery, and that that it's more designed that way, I suppose. But this, I think, having the sympathy that this film does, and the empathy really coming from like an outsider artist like Tim Burton is as well. It just there's more just humanity in the way that he looks at it, and I think that you can get more attached that way. With Disaster Artist, I did feel like, even though Tommy Wiseau seems to be a very questionable person, there did seem to be this open mockery of it that seemed to be a little strange, just especially when I'm directly comparing it to something like this. I like even the positive attitude that he puts into Ed Wood. Like, I guess those come from the letters that he was reading, where it's like, no matter what he knew about, especially retrospectively, what he knew about how people viewed his films, the way that the letters read were that he was constantly like relentlessly positive and believing in himself, and what he wanted to do.
And Johnny Depp's performance, I have to say, in capturing that, like, just this constant source of like childish like chipperness. He's got a grin and a glint in his eye, even while he's doing like hustle mindset stuff. Like, he has this like old Hollywood door-to-door salesman. Exactly. Yeah. And in this kind of like bright, feel good commercial kind of type energy to him. And it's a perfect approximation of what all of his friends referred to him as, which was, as referenced in the movie, the sort of the Orson Welles of no budget pictures, or a guy who had sort of real childlike gee whiz enthusiasm for movies and big dreams and aspirations, and who, worked fairly hard to try to achieve them, and was just thrilled by the process of making movies, even if it was laden with limitations and obstacles that, had to make him become something of this charming, depending on who you ask, self-destructive sort of con artist, just stringing these movies together and under the sort of meagerest of resources. And I don't know, Johnny Depp's physical performance and the things he does with his face, and the way that he is able to just constantly make Ed Wood, the moment where I realized the performance was as special as it was when he got a great gag laugh, but it's just such a heartwarming character beat when he's on the phone with that Warner studio executive, and the guy's just like, and you can't hear what the studio executive is saying to him, but Johnny Depp's just in a payphone. He goes, "Worst film you've ever seen? Well, my next one will be better."
Yeah, he does have this thing where, like, one of my favorite moments where he has the salesman attitude kind of thing is where he's doing it towards the producer, that I think he's trying to get Glenn or Glenda at, and he says right before this scene, he's reading a review, and the whole thing is negative, and he's with the crew, and he's still trying to keep it upbeat and be like, "Hey, look at this, guys! They said that the costumes were really realistic. That's a praise," like stuff like that. And then the next scene, he uses that as saying, "Yes, but in my last film, they said that they praised it for its realism, not specifying." The costume or anything like that. So it's just this way of kind of selling himself. And you'll see it. I have to look at my notes, but there was a couple specifics I have where he even starts to almost sell to himself the way that he's kind of, motivating himself or talking to himself or even talking to someone else. He'll be lying. It's kind of like half truth all the time, but there are these moments where he's even doing it to himself to just keep it moving, keep it pushing forward. And then another thing I like with Johnny Depp's his quickness, the way that he just like hits all this dialogue really quickly, and they are kind of doing the rhythm of dialogue like those old 50s movies, which is really cool. But there'll be beats where even the jokes are kind of in the same vein as his quickness. Like one part I love where I think it's one of the lead guys when they're doing Plan 9 asks like where the cockpit set is. And then in the background, you see them just getting it together within 3 seconds because it's just like a curtain and 2 pieces of wood or whatever. And Johnny's just like, it's right behind you. Like, and it goes quick. And I think all those beats mixed with his character are fantastic as well.
I mean, the Johnny Depp performance I think it's his best performance, probably. It's a risky performance because he is constantly just on the knife edge of being incredibly annoying throughout. And I don't know how he stays on the right side, but he does it. I'm not sure. I don't know. I guess a lot of it just has to do with the fact that like, he's a good man, the character, not Johnny Depp, to be clear. Ed Wood, as depicted in the movie, is just a very like welcoming and non-judgmental guy, not without his complications and flaws. But like, I guess that's why, Johnny Depp talking in this ridiculously grating voice for the whole time, and having this chipper manner is able to sustain itself across 2 hours.
I think that too, like him having this chipper fake thing, it just wraps up with his character of like, especially in that first, like I would say 3/4 where it's really just him going from like production to production, trying to get things done, trying to keep his relationship afloat, all of that. And then in the last quarter is where you get to see him kind of get overwhelmed and still try to put on that happy-go-lucky, everything's going okay, I just have to keep moving forward attitude. But you see the things kind of crumble. And that I think is important for the consistency in the first half of his performance.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important too that, the writers and Burton and everyone seemed to identify, what it was that we kind of felt when we were watching Plan 9 from Outer Space. But also, I mean, especially Glenn or Glenda. I mean, Glenn or Glenda may be the most prime example, but like you watch how confessional that movie is, and obviously the details of how confessional it is are literally in the plot of this movie. But it's such a sincere expression of someone earnestly thrilled by the idea of just making a movie and loving movies and loving a certain period of movies, and just so emotionally desperate to be seen by the world in some capacity and accepted as who he is and as an artist. And I think because they found the right view of him and what it was that he was trying to do, the movie kind of acts in a way to do it for him. And I think that helps the Depp performance along, because you watch it and you know that, every once in a while he's being an annoying hustler or an annoying con artist to a character. And you kind of know that. And every bit of it is charming to you because you know that his heart is completely in this thing. And ultimately it's going to be, he's building more honest relationships with people who are equally, strange and wouldn't mind sometime, being able to make a movie and being able to dream together and being able to, I think that's the sort of perspective the movie takes on his character, which is why the performance then is able to work.
Yeah, I think it's
go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick that I think it's just that his intentions are so good. That's why that you kind of get over some of the things that he does. It's just like you see the passion that he has for this dream that seems so entirely out of reach for somebody like him, and the fact that he just keeps going for it and going for it. And of course, there are moments like when he starts to kind of lie to his girlfriend in certain ways, stuff like where you're like, okay, you're doing it more in a selfish manner than in a way that feels like it's for the crew. But that's human. There's obviously going to be faults in Ed Wood here. So but the
way that he tries to confess to her by making her part of the movie, which we talked about when we covered Glen or Glenda, because it was just something he actually did. But could you imagine? He's just like, where are all my Angora sweaters going? And then your boyfriend hands you a script, and the script is like, I like wearing them.
Yeah. Apparently in real life, Dolores Fuller has said this. He didn't show her the full script to Glen or Glenda, and she only learned about the extent of his cross-dressing like after the movie was made somehow. I don't know how that's possible, but apparently that was
they were
the
recreating scenes in Glen or Glenda. Like if you watch that movie, you're just like, this is clearly about him and her on screen. Yeah.
Which
is why it's so beautiful, because there's this fantasy moment where she, and they do recreate it in the movie too. That amazing moment where she hands him the sweater and is like, "We'll get through this. We'll do something here." And it's very beautiful in Glen or Glenda, and then to see it sort of dramatized here, even if they do have the Sarah Jessica Parker version of Dolores definitely be a little bit antagonistic to the idea of Ed Wood sort of, coming out and making a bunch of cool drug addicted and, sort of gender fluid friends.
Yeah, I mean, if you could fault this movie for anything, I would say that the two major female characters are probably the weakest ones in the movie. I mean, the Dolores Fuller character, as played by Sarah Jessica Parker, I mean, I think it's basically historically accurate. I think she did sort of feel alienated by his lifestyle and his circle of friends. And I mean, in fairness to the real Dolores Fuller, she was kind of the breadwinner in the relationship. And when he gave away her part in Bride of the Monster, she obviously saw that neither the artistic nor the personal union was going very far, very fast. And the Patricia Arquette character who plays Kathy Wood, the woman who eventually became his wife, I don't know. It's like she's a bit of a placeholder character in the second half. She's
the one to be like, oh, I accept you because you told me on our first date, which I will say, by the way, though, I do really like Patricia Arquette's delivery of okay in that scene. I find it so romantic that she goes into that little like spooky ride with him. And he says, by the way, I like to wear women's clothes, but I still want to have sex with you. And she's like, okay,
okay,
that's great. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's get married. I'm going to be with you for 20 years. And I'm going to make a movie
and never remarry.
To the idea of Ed Wood being a con artist, I think it's a very interesting question because, in real life, the making of Plan 9 from Outer Space, it's basically accurately depicted here. Like there was a guy named Ed Reynolds, his landlord, at the Beverly Hills Baptist Church, who like came to Hollywood wanting to make biblical epics, and the church raised enough money to make one movie. And Ed Wood was like, hey, listen, you should invest in a surefire moneymaker like a science fiction film or a horror film. And then with the enormous profits you're going to make from this, you can make 10 biblical epics. And in Ed Wood's book Hollywood Rat Race, which is a kind of memoir / how-to manual for aspiring creatives, he writes about getting baptized to make Plan 9 from Outer Space, and he writes about it in this almost like huckster tone of like, oh, I'll do anything to get a movie financed. Why don't you know? I even got baptized once. And Ed Reynolds from the Baptist Church of Beverly Hills, he within 2 years of the movie being made, lost all his money and died, died of a broken heart, they say, because of how badly the film failed. But also Ed Wood himself also lost all his money and gave up any ownership share of that movie. So it's like, to the extent that he was a con artist, he was a con artist entirely for art, not for money.
Yeah.
Like, he was a terrible businessman who had no interest in that sphere. He just wanted to make the movie.
And I think that's what the movie does a good job of representing to you, and why it feels so innocent, even when they are showing you some of the thornier details of something like that. And I mean, I feel that especially in like the centerpiece of the movie, which is obviously Johnny Depp's relationship to Bela Lugosi, played by Martin Landau in this film, who is doing equally incredible, if not even more impressive work in his performance, just like mimicking Lugosi's obviously sort of theatrical cadences and being drenched in Rick Baker makeup to kind of make him look like Lugosi, yet never feeling like he's doing any kind of like mocking impression work. It does feel like he really is like trying to capture the, you know, weary end of this man's life and how sad it was, and the chemistry that he and Johnny Depp have together as Ed Wood and Lugosi is fantastic. And it's such an important, like, large portions of the movie are basically a buddy movie, and the movie almost feels like it changes a little bit when Lugosi dies, because it's just him hanging out with all his nutty friends after that. But like, Lugosi does frequently is the scenes with him are the scenes where I do feel the most of like on one level, complicatedly, maybe a little bit cynically, like obviously he's using this man to finance his movies. He's going around town being like, Lugosi is in this movie, that's why this guy's giving me money, and I'm losing that guy's money, and the movie sucks, and you know, whatever. But on the other hand, it's combined with these scenes of Ed Wood full on looking at this man and being the only man on the planet who goes, that guy is movie magic. He just is. He still is. No one, everyone's watching him on TV, and you know, there's that really sad scene where they try to let him do improv comedy on a variety television show, and it just goes horribly wrong because he's just a man out of time at that point, the same way that, you know, Karloff was when he was making movies like Targets and stuff like that. But it's just, you know, there's something so sad about, you know, what happened to Lugosi at the end of his life, and there was one guy who financially benefited from this friendship hugely. I mean, I guess quantifiably hugely, you know, we'll say, but, you know, got to make his movies, but, you know, was also just the one guy who was like, that guy, the Hollywood sign should be Bela Lugosi, is how Ed Wood kind of feels. And that romanticism is, I think, in that relationship.
And in real life, Bela Lugosi's son has said very negative things about Ed Wood. He regarded Ed Wood warily. You know, he called him a user. But I think Ed Wood's best defense is the art. I mean, you look at Bride of the Monster, and it's the best showcase for Bela Lugosi that he got in the last decade of his life. You know, the home, I have no home speech. You know,
the big monologue, and when they do it in this movie, and he does it like on the lawn, and you can even feel Burton like push in to be like, no, this is like, maybe it's a hokey monologue, but look at the way this man is delivering it, and that's movies.
Even something as like what seems to be when Ed Wood is explaining to him that he's like the puppet master, and then they have that pull the strings line, and like when Ed Wood hears it for the first time, he goes like, oh, I like that, that's good, so just like put it in as like a hacky line or whatever. But then when Lugosi delivers it, he delivers it with such power and such like
gusto,
meaning and gusto, and to the point where Ed, like the rest of the crew, they're kind of taken back by it when he does it, because it's out of place for sure within the rest of the stuff, but it's still so like passionately done that they are also still watching someone with extreme talent deliver it. And then Ed Wood or Johnny Depp's performance reacting to it is amazing. Just like, he doesn't care that it doesn't have much to do with whatever's surrounding the film. He's just like, that right there, that was art, that was passion, that was just pure expression. And I just, it's fantastic.
And I feel like Burton really just does indulge those moments where, you know, he does push the camera in and he does go, look at the magnetism of this performance that's being done. And then he interweaves those with the scenes of, you know, him calling Ed in the middle of the night and going, I'm so broke, Eddie, like make me some goulash, like and overdosing, and him having to take him to rehab and all these things he actually had to do in real life. And it's really
And then
really
they have
powerful.
these amazing hangout moments where it's like he's teaching him about like the almost the hypnotizing qualities of what old horror used to be, where he's like using his hands and he's just like, yes, call to me and stuff like that. And then one of the most beautiful moments is near the end with Lugosi's character, where I guess it is the end of Lugosi's character, where he gets this kind of final praise on the streets, where he's recognized, and he does a speech from one that Ed Wood wrote for him, and Ed Wood is looking at him doing it, having his last moment of kind of like recognition and praise as a performer, and then the guy actually looking at him and going, "You're just as good as you ever were." It's really
it's movie magic. And then immediately followed up by him finding that guy who looks like him so that they could use the footage for Plan 9 that they ended up, incorporating into the movie. And then having the sort of fake Lugosi who just always keeps his fake face covered and all of that. But you get that incredible moment where they just basically go, doesn't this all strike you as a little bit morbid, that you're using Lugosi in this way? And he goes, no, Bella has returned from the grave. He's just like Dracula. So it's the two modes of Ed Wood. I don't know. There's something there, and the fact that it's just in the movie, and they don't look away from it. They go, they do confront it. It's really beautiful.
And again, it does convince you too at the moment that like Ed Wood, obviously he's trying to get his film made. And so there's parts of that are there and he's still playing the salesman and everything. But then the way that Tim Burton will film him discovering something like that actor, the Dr. Tom Mason character. And he's just like, they do this kind of low angle shot because he's sitting in a booth at a restaurant. And then the lighting covers like half of his face so that he only sees the top half and everything. He's just like, oh my God, wait. It's the perfect head for Lugosi. And you are convinced in some sense that part of it is at least that he genuinely wants to put Lugosi back on the screen in some way, some type of recognition. Now it is, again, he's still trying to make his movie. There's still that part of it. But I love that you still believe in his genuine affection for the man. And I also, just a couple more with Lugosi that I loved was when he says that Dracula is the best date because of its like the best date movie because of its like seductive qualities and stuff like that. Thought that was great. And
I love when he meets him, he's picking out his coffin, which is a great meta joke to use visually. Yeah.
And then the one of my favorites is because he spends a couple scenes in the first half of the movie like cursing out Karloff. And,
now that's inaccurate, right, Will? I heard a lot of people complaining about that.
The origin story basically of their friendship.
No, that Lugosi was like, I guess it was Lugosi's son or something who was saying that. He didn't like swear all the time, and he wasn't like freaking out at crew members and stuff like that.
So there are a couple of short story. It is basically not accurate, but in the book Nightmare of Ecstasy, Ed Wood has a friend named John Andrews, a sort of drinking buddy, who, when he would tell stories about, hanging out with Ed Wood, he would constantly be elaborating the dialogue with like F words and stuff. So Scott and Larry, when they wrote the script, thought it was funny, the way he described, Bela Lugosi saying, fuck this, fuck that. So they incorporated it into the dialogue. But then also that book, Nightmare of Ecstasy, has an interview with Ed Wood in it. Ed Wood did an interview with a biographer named Robert Kramer, where he just offhandedly said, oh, and Bela could curse like a sailor, as we all know. So according to Ed Wood himself, Lugosi swore.
Interesting.
Now, nobody else,
stories.
Yeah, everybody else in Lugosi's life said he never did. Certainly he would never curse in front of a lady. But also, as to the rivalry with Boris Karloff, I don't think Lugosi would ever say "fuck Karloff," in public. But like, you have to imagine, like, how could he not have hated Boris Karloff, right? How could on some level, if I were him, I would have been thinking "fuck Karloff" every day of my life.
And there is that scene where he says, like, he's about to fight the octopus that doesn't have a motor in it, so he has to like wrestle with it in the swamp or whatever. And he is kind of reminiscing about his career and how he got here, and he's just like, I turned down Frankenstein. why did I turn down Flake? Because he thought of it as kind of just.
Well, yeah, it wasn't a theatrical
grunting
performance. It was a guy who grunted who didn't get to say monologues. So he was like, that's not acting.
Right. And I was always curious if that came from somewhere, if that was almost just an idea of like just kind of falling off, and that being what, at least in the pop culture perspective, views you as like your replacement or whatever. But the one line I did love that is associated with it, if it's true or not, it's hilarious, is where they're in the church, and this is where they get the Tom Mason character who's playing the the Lugosi double, and Bill Murray's character is just like, he's trying to prove to him like that he's the right guy, and he's just like, hey, call Karloff a cocksucker, we'll see if that impression works. And that's one of my favorite jokes in the whole movie, so either way it works for me there.
Yeah, no, that helps a lot with this movie too. It is incredibly like just funny and enjoyable to watch all these characters interact with each other. Like when he starts picking up all of the sort of like nutty misfits and dope addicts, as Dolores calls them. And, you get, Lisa Marie is doing a very fun sort of like deadpan Vampira. George the Animal Steel is, I thought, great as Tor Johnson, who was already just a fantastically strange character, the 400-pound like Swedish wrestler that Ed Wood brought into all of his movies. The way that he's introduced, and you just get Ed Wood just being mesmerized, like, look at this giant man. Is anyone else seeing this giant man over here? I'm going to go speak to him. And he goes backstage. But the recreation of the boxing ring and how artificial it is looks awesome. It looks like straight out of the setup. And he goes behind it, and Tor is just is the hairiest, largest man you've ever seen being massaged, and he's just eating a giant fucking like roast chicken while getting his massage, and he's just like, you are perfect for Lobo. And you already mentioned it, Jamie, but he does get one of my favorite moments in the entire movie, and just one of the best moments of looking into Ed Wood's process, because there's a scene in Bride of the Monster where Lugosi and Tor Johnson are directed to do the exact same thing, which is that they go through a door into a hallway. And they go, now you're upset. You're upset about your experiment. And then you're like, but you're not that upset, because they're crying too much. And then they lift their heads up, and then like, and now you're motivated. You're going to go through the other door and you're going to complete the experiment. They do the scene twice. And when Tor Johnson does it, he nearly knocks the set over, which was a consistent thing we talked about in Ed Wood movies, where tombstones were falling over, set pieces. You could tell everything was made of cardboard. And just the fact that you have the guy constantly throw the whole movie, the cinematographer, just being like, you sure you don't want another take, Ed? He's like, no, it's perfect. We got it. We don't. And he's like, you nearly knocked the set over. And he was just like, no, it's fine. It's real. In actuality, Lobo would have to struggle with that problem every day, which is such a beautiful line, because it's both like a strangely sad, just like artistic perspective, and as an observation on the character. Like, he's made up this fictional character in his mind. He's like, he would have to deal with that. And, and so it's something he's thought through, but it's also just legitimately an excuse to be like, no, we got the take. Let's move on. Let's keep the production going. Right. And it's part of the bigger idea that he keeps repeating, which is that, filmmaking is about the bigger picture. No audience is going to care about that little detail that went wrong. And unfortunately, he was wrong. Many IMDb people will still point out that thing fell over, that did that, or whatever.
And then eventually, it led to YouTube channels like Everything Wrong With and all that bullshit.
Yes. Right.
So, if anything, exactly. Way too hypersensitive about all that shit.
That is apparently something that Ed Wood in real life, some of his actors have said that one of his favorite phrases was dramatic license. On the set, if there was any question about like anything illogical in the script, any sort of blooper, he'd just say dramatic license, let it go. You're mentioning Tor's introductory scene, and the screenplay is quite skillful in, I think Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski have said this in various interviews. There are so many characters, and they're all very colorful characters. So one of the things they do to keep all the plates spinning is when you see a character, they are doing the thing that defines them. So in real life, Tor Johnson had not been a wrestler for many years. He had for years been a sort of Hollywood bit part actor. It's very likely that Ed Wood met Tor Johnson because he was working as just a gopher at Universal Studios in the early 1950s, just working as like a PA basically. And Tor Johnson was in a movie called Abbott and Costello in the Foreign Legion, just as a henchman. And Ed Wood worked on that film, and he probably met him there. But, how do you dramatize that? It's like, what matters about Tor Johnson is that he was a Swedish wrestler. And so, of course,
that's what's so beautiful about this movie. Like, it's filled with little, like, print the legend, like, moments of, like, no, Tor was this fantastical wrestler, and he just caught his eye, and then he was in the movie. And the way the movie streamlines and blends, like, even when it's inaccurate, I feel like the spirit of what it was that he was trying to get out of hiring Tor Johnson is all correct.
Yeah. I think it goes, like, again, with his style, like we were saying, how he would make excuses for certain shots. Later on, we see, like, the two examples I loved was one when they're on the streets and he has to go into a shop that they don't have permission to use. So they do the one shot. It's the same thing where the camera guy's like, "You sure you don't want to do another one?" He's just
we don't have permits. Everybody scatter.
And then they see the cops, so they're just like, "Get the hell out of here!" They're picking up the giant camera and running away and stuff. Like, I love that. It's just like the illusion of, like, the facade, what he's trying to put across, where he's just got everything together, just disappears, and then he just goes panic and run away. I love that. And then the other one is when the stress starts to actually really build, and I was kind of talking about it in the last quarter of the movie, when he's got all the investors on his ass and everything, and he eventually just kind of admits to the stress, and he's just like, "Look, I've got 25 shots to do tonight in, like, the next 6 hours, so we just need to get this shot done and over with." And it's interesting to watch him go from that, like, salesman to just be real, to be honest, because it's just so stressful at a certain point that he has to kind of just expose himself.
Well, I mean, I think that's why it was so wonderful that Ed Wood had that experience on making movies. Because on some level, I mean, people will say, did he know how to make a movie? Like, in the most technical sense. But he did. Like, he would be like, the guy gets his shots. The PA needs to be over here doing that. And I like the early scenes in the movie, even when they're showing him just, like, carrying a fucking tree from, like, one, sort of studio lot to another one. Or that bit when the stock footage guy who's, filing all of the sort of archived material away shows him all this cool footage, and you just get that magical moment where he starts writing a story in his head, being like, "Oh, the explosions are going off, and the military in for this," and he goes, "You forgot the octopus." He's like, "No, that's for the water climax I'm saving for the end." And the way and how all of that footage eventually kind of made its way into his movies, even though you watch them in the movies and you're like, this is the way that he used stock footage is completely surreal when you actually watch his movies.
But I love the way that he also justifies it. There's this kind of, like, pure artistry to it, where he's just like, "Well, look at all this amazing footage. It'd be a waste not to use it." And so it's just like, that's the excuse rather than is it useful? He's just like, well, it's already good footage, so why would I waste this? Why would it go to just, someone has to see this. And just that attitude is kind of beautiful in itself too.
The question of whether or not Ed Wood had any talent, I think, is an interesting one, because if you look at Bride of the Monster, that's the most money he ever had to make a movie. That's the most, he had like $60,000 or something like that. It's the most normal movie he ever made. And kind of the limit of its vision is, what if I made a Bela Lugosi fan film? So, I think his talents were perhaps limited. But he obviously was resourceful, and he had a weird point of view. It's like, I do think he had a certain accidental talent, which is not exactly the same as So Bad It's Good. In Glen or Glenda, when there's that stock shot of the buffalo, and that interrupts the romantic scene between Ed and Dolores Fuller, and there's the buffalo and Lugosi going, pull the string. It's like, who else would think of that? It's amazing.
Literally nobody else.
Yeah, and there has to be something to be said for that. He's got a weird point of view. Nobody would put these elements together in quite this way.
Yeah, which is, I love that scene, and I'm assuming that this is not real, but when he talks to Orson Welles, and Orson Welles is just basically like, is like, never stray away from your vision. Essentially, do not dream someone else's dream.
Yeah, why spend your life making someone else's dreams? And it is funny because it does connect. Like, you know, Orson was obviously someone who dealt with a lot of industry, you know, problems in his life, and they make a quick crack about it with Touch of Evil, where they're like, they're making me cast Charlton Heston as a Mexican man, and, you know, all this, and you know, there is definitely a little bit of like a insider Hollywood sort of meta joke happening there of being like, here's like the ultimate revered artist of someone of a maverick who technically made studio movies but fought them tooth and nail his entire life, and then here's a guy who probably would have done that if he got the opportunity to do that, but, you know, he had the opportunity for sort of studio money, like maybe once, maybe twice. And then he was like, I'm an independent artist and I'm going to raise all this money to make movies because my movies aren't doing very well. But yeah, no, that's a lovely scene, even the fact that it's Vincent D'Onofrio, who looks great, but clearly Tim Burton didn't like his voice, so they dubbed him. The dubbing and how kind of, you know, weird it is was something that I just went, that's something Ed Wood would do.
I like that actually, because it emphasizes the otherworldly, dreamlike quality of that scene. It makes the scene feel less literal, which I think helps it.
And it's just like, even the way it's presented, you know, he's just smoking in a booth. He's by himself. It's Orson Welles. He stumbles upon him. It's that moment where basically like his spirit guide comes to him, and it's just
you and
like,
we're alike, you know.
Yeah, it's when the fox comes to Homer Simpson in the desert. You know, he's guiding him.
No, it's
had to make a Simpsons reference. I apologize.
No, get it in. Did the Simpsons ever do an Ed Wood thing? You know, I don't know.
I don't know. Actually, I'm sure they made a reference. I'm sure they've done it to everything.
Listeners, sound off. Any hardcore Simpsons head, let us know. But Will, I do like your point a lot, and we talked about this a lot when we did our Glenn or Glenda Plan 9 from Outer Space. But like this, you know, the fact that and we quoted we the motto in his book too. I think it was in Rat Race, because that's the book that I read, which is the one where he said, acting and artistry is to portray another person with all your ability and sincerity and heart and soul. And that's the thing I think ultimately that this movie gets right about Ed Wood, is that that's what he absolutely believed that he was doing, regardless of if he had the technical skills to be able to do it. And I think that overpowers that when you watch his movies. And I mean, Dave Kerr referred to him as like an unconscious avant-gardist, that the movies have blunders, but they are creative and expressive when they are blunders. And I think that's so much of where the power comes from, and so much of what I think Burton gets right about his perspective here too, because he shows you all the blunders as he's making them, and all of the people doubting him being like, you're really sure that's perfect? You're really sure that that's a wrap and that we're moving on from this? And he's like, yep, it's all about the bigger picture, and everyone is going to get into this movie, and we're all going to go to the premiere. And I mean, the fact that there's two premiere scenes in this film, and the first one's Bride of the Monster, where they walk in partway through and everyone's throwing popcorn at the screen and then literally chasing them out of the theater. And then the big final one, when all of the actors are kind of sitting and they don't know what they're about to watch yet, and they're cheering each person's credit as it appears on screen, and you get to see Tor Johnson and Vampira's just, you know, faces as the glow of the screen. And I don't know, there's something so beautiful about them being like, this is where we're going to end this story, because here is the high point, technically, I think, of Ed Wood's life, that he really did make this thing, and he found his wife, he found this community of people who accept him and, you know, want to go out with him and have those like cast parties that they have, where he's like, you know, it is drag outfit as Shirley doing, you know, song and dance numbers, and everyone there is having a great time and being like, that's just Eddie. Everyone loves Eddie, you know? And this guy made that for himself. You know, it was not something that, you know, would have existed unless he pushed it and pushed it and pushed it to exist. It was the ambition, and it was the money mindset that kind of got him to that point, and he created the space for himself. And, you know, this movie just does feel like such an incredible tribute to that space and what he wanted to express.
And I love too when he does talk to Wells, and then he gains this like confidence again and comes back in, and then they just kind of do this awesome montage of him being so locked in that it just goes from like every idea that he had for Plan 9, one after the other, just kind of like he's in complete just focus mode, just hyper focused. And it's fun too, because you're watching a man create something that is well, I mean, it depends on the perspective, of course, but is going to fail, at least commercially speaking, and everything. And him doing it with such still enthusiasm and confidence and going like, this is the decision I'm making, and I know that this is the right one. And so watching that montage has such a different spin than a montage like that usually would. And I love that too.
The recreations are all fantastic too. I'm so glad they included the one of Criswell delivering one of my all-time favorite lines in any movie ever, which is, future events such as these will affect you in the future.
It's true.
I forgot about that.
Can't deny
the truest line ever spoken in a movie.
Yeah, for real.
Plan 9 from outer space is going to happen to us in the future.
Oh man, and I love that there's such a there's a lot of heartwarming qualities too when he goes up and it's like in that theater and everyone's actually going to pay attention, and it feels like they're going to at least for the first half maybe pay respect to the film, and he's just like, this film is for Bella. And it honestly, even though we've seen what he's had to do to get there, it does feel genuine in that moment, that he's genuinely like, I'm going to put this on the screen for Bella for the last time. And that is like, it just feels, genuine. So that I loved. I also love that this one I'll be remembered for having that kind of irony, which is like, you definitely were.
Will was comparing this a little bit to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That moment is both Ed Wood and Tim Burton's "This is my masterpiece," or I think this is my masterpiece at the end of Inglourious Bastards.
Right. Yep. 100%. This one line I loved just before we get too wrapped up is when he says, someone says something like, you don't pass judgment, and he's just like, no, I don't. If I did that, I wouldn't have any friends. I just think that's a great line. Wonderful.
Yeah. No. What a picture. If we're pivoting towards reductive rating round on Ed Wood here, this is a pretty easy 5 for me. I just think it's just one of those like rare perfect alignments of the material and the maker. You have Tim Burton, who is just a completely oddball stylist who really does, if you watch his movies, like have a legitimately personal affection for weirdos and outsiders, and obviously his own love of old science fiction and horror B movies, and this era of Hollywood. And he just happened to find material about the ultimate symbol of both of those things in Ed Wood, and really did, I think, work hard to kind of correct the story on this guy's life through fantasy and give him what it was that the guy was seeking. Like, he was always someone who really did earnestly love movies and really was thrilled by the process, and wanted to get all these friends together to make one. And he was someone who wanted to be seen and accepted and loved. And I really do think that this movie did so much work for people in sort of course correcting after the sort of mockery that, his reputation had experienced for a decade or longer. And obviously, the Rudolph Gray, who wrote the book as well, and all the work that he absolutely did in compiling and researching all of that material is, probably deserves more credit than Ed Wood, than Tim Burton. But Tim Burton, I think, absolutely got the spirit of all of that right, and absolutely, in terms of sort of populist, perception, he made a movie that ended up winning an Oscar. About a guy who could not have been further from that in his life. And I don't know, there's something just beautiful to me about the fact that Ed Wood never found that love and understanding while he was here. And it's just, so many people will watch this movie now and they will feel it, and they will feel the, sentimentality and the lack of judgment about it. And, just it's such an empathetic and affectionate tribute to this man, as well as the old school sort of Hollywood movie magic the guy himself loved, and the way that it goes through every just detail of his life and his relationship and his, his sexuality and his production history and all of these, you really could not believe any of this happened, and it might not have happened in the exact way that it happens on screen here. And, part of that is because, as Criswell says in the movie, we're in showbiz. It's all about razzle dazzle. And, Burton, I think, nails that quality, and the movie itself is just gorgeous. The style of it, the production design, the cinematography, all of the actors he was able to put together here in the supporting cast, but both obviously Depp, who I think this is his best performance, and Landau, who I think is maybe the sort of emotional center of the movie, because, you know, Ed Wood is constantly kind of in hustle mindset. So you have to have, you know, Lugosi here is what kind of grounds him and kind of makes him bear witness to what ended up happening really to him, which was that Hollywood, you know, kind of took him in and chewed him up. And, you know, it's really sad to think about that, but it's, you know, I like that they include the sort of like rise and fall happening at the same time here. It's it's Ed Wood's Star is Born moment to watch Lugosi go down as he's about to make his premiere and all of that. So yeah. And last but not least, because we did not somehow mention it throughout, this is one of the only, or maybe just one of the few non-Danny Elfman scored Tim Burton films. This one is scored by Howard Shore, who was a lifelong David Cronenberg collaborator, who obviously also went on to have an incredible career in Hollywood, doing like Silence of the Lambs and Lord of the Rings movies and all that kind of stuff. And I think all of the music in this is a huge part, on top of the production design and on top of the sort of recreation of the black and white look. The way that he whips out the theremin sometimes, or does these old-timey monster movie scores, or does the classical orchestral bombast when the drama kind of picks up. I think the score in this is a huge reason, once again, that just the period illusion and recreation in this film is one of the most beautiful of its kind. And to see so much loving craftsmanship go into doing a goofy reenactment of Ed Wood shooting Plan 9 from outer space is just something, again, to me, it's just movie magic. So 5 for me.
Yeah, nice. I think right now I'm at the Jamie 4. I think this is the second time I've watched this. The first time I watched it was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, honestly, and I think at the time I hadn't seen any Ed Wood movies. I just knew of his reputation. And what I found it did, not knowing anything and just going into it blindly, was it completely reverse this notion of like he wasn't a respectable artist. And I found that Tim Burton was able to do that without me even seeing any of his movies. At least just give me this kind of idea going into watching this stuff. And then when we started covering stuff on the show, I mean, Glen or Glenda specifically, I think is a really good movie. And Plan 9 from Outer Space, I don't enjoy it as much, actually, but I do have a good time with it. I found to really respect him as an artist, and then watching this again with that new perspective, I think I finally get it, and I don't view him as a really awful director. I think I've seen so many movies that are far less entertaining than anything Ed Wood has made, and I just need to dive into a few more of his movies. I think for this to really grab onto me fully, but I just, even what it's saying about the love for the outsider artist and the love for what you think is your vision and staying true to that, I think is a really beautiful thing. It even has stuff like in the production of this film, like I think we even said that Tim Burton was fought against when he wanted to do the black and white style and wanted to make it more like a 50s movie, and he just said, like, until that happens, we're not making the film. And so I think that's a great thing, and it really captured Ed Wood's entire persona and his energy. And I like that it still has moments where his kind of salesman persona and just his enthusiasm breaks down, but never enough that it turns into this, like, distraught drama. I feel like it still captures the heart of him the entire time. And I like that it does the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood revisionary ending. I think that's it just, I don't think this would make any sense to dive into the last third of the movie and him become an alcoholic and
everyone went into the movie, and said, this man suffered so much. We are not going to ridicule this man. We are not going to end this movie on abject failure. We are going to end on a high point, whether, and we have to cheat to do that. Yeah, we're going to do that.
Yeah. And I think that's an amazing thing to do, and so respectful. There's, I guess, just a couple more things I had for the movies themselves. But the gun scene where Lugosi calls him to his house, and then he's like going to commit suicide, and he's got the gun. I love what he does with the shadows, where like it almost seems like there's lamps covering half of their face, and it just has this really almost it kind of like it's one of the more heavy moments in the movie, where it does feel like Ed Wood has to be incredibly serious instead of just a salesman. He still is kind of doing that to save Lugosi's life and to get him into a better mindset, but it still feels genuine. And I love just the way that Tim Burton designed the lighting in that. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, and it did the one part where they got the Mason character to do the Lugosi double. It did. I really do wish we could get the Ed Wood opinion on CGI resurrections nowadays. I would just love to know what he would have to say about that. But anyway,
I bet he would be pro. I think he would be pro.
Yeah. He's like, I can make so many movies with all my favorite stars. Oh man. But yeah, so for now, 4 out of 5, but I could see this getting the upgrade. This thing's amazing.
For you, Will.
The easy 5 bagger, I think. It's interesting. The movie makes a case for Ed Wood. I think that sort of comes down to he made movies independently. He got it done. He had a lot of fun, and he made a lot of friends along the way. And as Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski have mentioned in interviews, they have a bit of a structural challenge where Glenn or Glenda is the one out of these 3 movies that we see him making that's the most personal or the most obviously personal. And it would be so convenient if it ended with Glenn or Glenda, like it ended with him making his final statement. And but that would be stretching the truth like too far, even for the bounds of this movie. But it does find a way to end on a triumphant note. And I think what I would just say, like not as a rebuttal to the movie, but just as a sort of friendly amendment, is something that I find kind of inspirational about Ed Wood is throughout the rest of his life into the 60s and 70s, in all of the like pornographic books that he was writing, and even in certain of the movies that he made, I do think he stayed an artist. I think the weird perspective that's in Glenn or Glenda is still in there in a lot of the books that he was writing later on. And in fact, some of those later things that he was writing, in the depths of alcoholism are, almost uncomfortably personal. Books like Diary of a Transvestite Hooker, Killer and Drag. I'm sure you've read all these, right? They're at your local library. And I find that, if there's anything that I would like to do as sort of, the next step of the critical recuperation.
You're pitching Tim Burton on Ed Wood 2.
Yeah. The next step of the critical recuperation for Ed Wood is to sort of, even in the depths of, the depths of what his life turned into, I think the artist remained present. And
Johnny Depp's looking a little haggard lately too. I bet you, they could get like bloated alcoholic, version of Ed Wood of just writing pornographic novels. They could do it.
I mean, who wouldn't want to see that movie? I want to see that movie.
Agreed. We would be the first to spotlight it 100%.
Because like really... if the question of this movie is who wants to watch a movie about a bad artist who failed, I think what Ed Wood 2 should be about is a bad artist who stayed an artist.
Yes.
Yep.
I love that.
Never compromised for a second.
Never.
Yeah, I mean, he made a lot of porn. You could call that compromising, but it's his porn. You can tell he made it.
Then maybe he did. He came to set with passion.
Yeah.
I can testify. We did watch. What was the one you had us watch?
The only house in town.
The only house in town. I can
will
attest
say that
there is no other porno I've seen that is like that film.
It was like a surreal pornographic trip. Absolutely.
Well, if you guys want one that's a little
Hollywood
more
recreation of the shooting of that movie.
Yes.
In Nightmare of Ecstasy, it goes into the production of his movie Necromania a little bit, which of course is one of the porn films. And I find that section kind of inspirational because Necromania was shot like in 2 days. And apparently Ed Wood was just like, he was in his element. He was making a movie again. The the pornographic like book company that produced that movie was like, all right, we're venturing into filmmaking. And Ed Wood's like, oh, let me direct. I'll direct anything. What do you want? And he writes the script for Necromania, and he's on the set. He's carrying himself like a director. He's acting like Orson Welles. And you watch Necromania, and it's a goddamn Ed Wood movie. It's got all the stuff in it. And I think that's powerful. You guys should do an episode on Necromania.
I think we will.
We will definitely get there. And I'm excited to read the book. I'm assuming there's lots of this content for anyone who wants to hear more of this. This is, I'm assuming, what the book is all going to be for when it eventually comes out in a little bit of time here. How far do you go? Do you go right to the end?
I go right to the end. I love everything Ed Wood made, honestly. I'm a pretty...
What's the last recorded thing that we've got?
Well...
Just out of curiosity.
Let's see, he made a lot of like loops in the 1970s, which are sort of like, silent 10-minute porno movies that you'd like buy on 8mm. But he is allegedly an uncredited director on a 1977 film called Meat Cleaver Massacre, which you can watch on Tubi right now. It's a fairly professional movie, but apparently it's a movie that Ed Wood was hired to work as like a still photographer, and the director didn't work out. So Ed Wood took over direction of it. And if you watch Meat Cleaver Massacre, I think he did a pretty commendable job.
Watch listed.
Oh, yeah, literally watch listed as you were saying that. Let's go.
Very excited for that. Tubi, it does it again, by the way.
That's right.
That's right. All right. Well, if you want, again, more of that, guys, the book is in the description of this episode here to go and explore more Ed Wood. But that's going to, I think, wrap it up for Ed Wood here. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be moving on from Mr. Ed Wood, and we're going to be talking about a colleague, a contemporary of Mr. Ed Wood. We're going to be talking about Phil Tucker and his film Robot Monster. Stick around.
Devastating forces of our future. Unsuspected revelations of incredible horrors that will terrify you with their brutal reality.
There is no escape from me. Very well. I will recalculate. Your death will be indescribable. Fool humans, there is no escape.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Robot Monster, aka Monster from Mars, aka Monsters from the Moon. The 1953.
Wait, is it Mars or the Moon?
I think it could be either. I don't know. Watching the movie, I think it's the Moon. I don't know why they ever called it Monsters from Mars. That doesn't really make sense. But these were the titles they went through.
He's Roman from the planet Roman, so I guess it depends. Maybe they've got another.
Why? What did he mean by that? I don't know. Nobody knows. It's just a thing that he says. It's a tick. But yes, this is the 1953 science fiction monster horror B movie directed by Phil Tucker, written by someone named Wyatt Ordung. I don't know anything else.
I'll tell you all about Wyatt Ordung.
I'm so excited to learn all of this. I'm going to get this out of the way as quickly as possible so that Will can give me. Because I was trying to do research for this one. There's not a lot out there. This is one of those classic. I don't love to like throw it to the guest to be like, you do the work. You tell me about. But this is. I know that Will spends his spare time looking into the works of Wyatt Ordung, and I'm sure this cast of people who I have also not seen in basically anything of George Nader, Claudia Barrett, and George Barrows, who is Roman here, the alien robot or the robot monster, who and this is according to the description of the film you will find written, greatly resembles a gorilla in a diving helmet, who is a creature sent to Earth to destroy all human life, and instead kind of falls in love with one of the last remaining humans, and sort of struggles to understand how his programming can instructs him to kill something when his heart is saying humanity is good and we should feel things, and it's beautiful. But this is our first time talking about the independent American filmmaker and editor Phil Tucker. This is his debut feature, his most popular feature, and Will, this is where we're going to throw it to you. Explain, where did Phil Tucker come from, and where did he go? Is it true that he tried to commit suicide over this movie?
Well, I've got a book here written by Mr. Edward D. Wood Jr. It's called Hollywood Rat Race. And there's a section in this book which is unmistakably about Phil Tucker. This
is incredible. I've read this book and I did not know this. Okay, what section?
so it's in a chapter called How to Make a Cheap Picture and Fail. And there are 2 paragraphs where he thinks he acts like he's talking about 2 separate things, but he's actually talking about Robot Monster and Phil Tucker. He says, there was a film in the days of 3D, which only because it was 3D played the Paramount Theater in Hollywood, one of the major houses. The picture lasted 1 performance, then was scrapped until television came in. It claimed to be a science fiction piece. The only science or fiction about it was the fact that it came into being at all. And this so-called producer is still around Hollywood taking backers' money for the same crap, which never even gets the glory of 1 performance. So he writes that. And then the very next paragraph.
Harsh words, Ed. Holy.
The very next paragraph, he claims to be writing about another person, but it's clearly also Phil Tucker. He says, another so-called producer has a unique way of distinguishing himself from his failures. My first experience with him was to write the pilot screenplay for a proposed television series for which I never was paid. But the guy had such a dynamic veneer, you just like to hear him talk. He goes on to write, he really does have plenty of imagination to pour into his sales pitch. Only one day, it really is going to kill him. Whenever he finds out that his newest bad picture won't sell, he comes up with the damnedest strategy: suicide. In one instance, he sat on the roof of a hotel with a can of his film in his lap and his legs dangling over the street 15 floors below. Then he gobbled down sleeping pills. Of course, the police had been conveniently notified, so they arrived in plenty of time. So that's Ed's take on Phil Tucker.
Wow, that's what he thinks about his quote unquote suicide attempt over the negotiation of profit sharing. I guess the money that it made, although it doesn't sound like it made a lot of money, but I mean maybe it was successful by like Ed Wood movie standards, I guess. Although I guess the box office here says $1 million. So
yeah, I was looking at that and I was
the
confused
3D gimmick maybe.
Yeah.
That's what Phil Tucker told the Medveds when they wrote the 50 worst films of all time. He said it made over $1 million, which it possibly did. I mean, 3D was a pretty big deal at the time. I think this movie played pretty widely.
I mean, people would have rolled out just to see the comedian in front of it, Slick Slavin.
You got it.
Have you seen this man's Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart? It's unbelievable.
Dude, that one of my favorite parts of that is how long it goes on for. I could not believe it.
It's like an 8-minute one reel like stand-up comic opener for a 60-minute movie.
Yeah, and basically
that has an intermission.
And all he's doing is he's singing a song that he's written. And he's doing it in different impersonations of Hollywood stars. And what's
Jimmy
funny
Stewart's
is like,
actually pretty good, though. To be honest,
yeah, like some of them are, they're fine impersonations here and there. And then what's hilarious about it is that he does like 3 or 4 of them, and then one of the jokes is actually very hilarious when he's just like, "Once again, here's Grant. I do 4." And I thought that joke was hilarious, to be honest. But then what's unbelievable about the whole bit is that it just keeps going and going. And then at a certain point, at least for me and my brother, when we were watching it, we were like, this is too long. And then it broke us again, where it was like, I can't believe he's actually still going. And that would make us laugh.
And then it became funny again. It circled back.
Yeah, it was it was such a strange trip. I will say that, especially like, because I was starting to make notes and the length of it is strange just because I already know it's an introduction. I've been in this era of film. I'm kind of used to seeing that every once in a while, but they're not usually this long and so hyper focused on someone that has nothing to do with the rest of the movie.
Yeah,
so
I hope Will, when you pick movies for us to watch, Jamie lives with his brothers, so he watches these movies with his brothers. So you are, by extension, whatever you choose to watch, you are also making like people who don't watch movies like ever also watch those movies. And Jamie gets some fantastic stories out of Tell us.
Let me tell you right now, Shane I didn't get my brother Alec to watch this, but Shane loved this movie. He was laughing the entire time. He was like, this is one of the most entertaining things. He almost 5'd it. He was like, I'm so thoroughly entertained by this thing. And I can't wait to get to some of these lines. I'll save them for now. But like we were howling, man. I really took to this film, and I'm still like, I'm crossed between what I'm rating it still, but I'm going to go back to this thing. I just thought it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen, whether it be intentional or not, of course.
Oh yeah. Well, before we get too deep into it, Will, give us Wyatt Ordung, Phil Tucker, these actors. How did this come to be as far as you are aware?
Well, I mean, there's a first of all great book called I Cannot Yet I Must: The True Story of Robot Monster by Anders Runstad, which runs 600 pages. God. That includes the shooting script. But it has all the Robot Monster information you could possibly want. I mean, this was an independently financed film. It was made for something like $16,000, something incredibly cheap. Phil Tucker was only 25 when he made the film. After this,
Orson Welles.
Yeah, that's right. Same age, and you know, who's to say which one's better? After this film,
it's debatable.
And after this film, and after his alleged suicide attempt, Phil Tucker went on to work with George Weiss, the producer of Glen or Glenda, played by Mike Starr in the Tim Burton film. You know, he directed the same year as Robot Monster. He directed Dance Hall Racket, which was a vehicle for a young comedian named Lenny Bruce, completely unknown at the time. Lenny Bruce wrote that film, and his wife, Honey Harlow, also starred in it. You know, throughout the 50s or the early 50s, Phil Tucker directed a number of sort of striptease movies like Tijuana After Midnight, Dream Follies, Baghdad After Midnight. Great films, beautiful films. But in 1955, he also made a movie called Broadway Jungle. It's actually called Hollywood Jungle, but the only surviving print is called Broadway Jungle. And that's notable because, you know, Anders Runstad, who wrote the Robot Monster book, and anyone who sees it thinks that that movie may be Phil Tucker's epic subtweet of Ed Wood, because it's about a sort of con man, Skid Row, independent movie producer who's really talkative, really flamboyant, and has an old, aged starlet who he's sort of stringing along to make a movie, to get financing for a movie. And everyone who sees that movie thinks, this character can only make you think about Ed Wood. And according to Ed Wood's own widow, Kathy Wood, the two of them, they were in the same orbit. They knew each other. They were friendly enemies. That's how she described them. So, I just love that the two of them, who knows, maybe Broadway Jungle isn't about Ed Wood, but I think it is. And I love
the idea of the girlies fighting in 1953 and fighting through no budget movies that nobody was watching.
Yeah. The two worst directors of all time, quote unquote, hating each other and having this turf war, making striptease movies for George Weiss. I think that's so powerful. Now, Wyatt Ordung, the writer of this film, for a long time, I thought that's got to be a fake name, but it wasn't. He was a real guy.
That's insane to me that it's not. That was literally the first thing I thought when I read that. And I was like, absolutely, Phil Tucker just wrote this movie. Who else could have written these incredible lines we'll get to?
Wyatt Ordung he was a minor actor, a minor writer, and his real place in history is the year after this movie, he directed a movie called Monster from the Ocean Floor, which is notable for being the first movie ever produced by Roger Corman. Roger Corman put his own money into it, hired Wyatt Ordung. Wyatt Ordung apparently did a terrible job, was really carried along by the cinematographer of the film. And Roger Corman saw Wyatt Ordung direct it and said, I could save money by directing these movies myself. I can do what Wyatt Ordung does. So we have Wyatt Ordung to thank for every movie Roger Corman ever directed, because he did such a bad job on Monster from the Ocean Floor.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And of the cast, I think the most notable person is George Nader, who's the leading man. This was his first film as a romantic lead. He had a sort of, he worked as a Universal Pictures contract player after this. He made a number of movies, very few of which are all that well remembered. There's a British noir film that I'm trying to remember the title of it. Nowhere to Go from 1958. That's kind of considered his best movie. He's notable because he was gay in the 1950s. He had a partner. He wasn't exactly out, but he wasn't playing the game. He wasn't being photographed with starlets. He wasn't really trying to hide it. And he was a very close friend of Rock Hudson. And basically Universal, I think the implication is that Universal sort of threw him to the wolves. That was like, okay, to the tabloids, don't report on Rock Hudson being gay. We'll give you George Nader. You can have him as a sort of sacrificial lamb. And, he was friends with Rock Hudson for his whole life. And I think when Rock Hudson died of AIDS in the 1980s, he gave a lot of his fortune to George Nader, partly because they're friends, possibly also because, out of gratitude for his sacrifice. And,
maybe there was a world where George Nader was in All That Heaven Allows and Rock Hudson was in Robot Monster.
I mean, George Nader, I know which movie I've watched more recently, and it's Robot Monster.
Damn straight. Damn straight.
And I just think having George Nader in the movie adds to the kind of, when you know that story, it adds to the Boulevard of Broken Dreams quality that is this movie. I also just want to say briefly that Gregory Moffat, the boy child in this movie, I interviewed him. I had him on my podcast a couple of years ago.
That's incredible.
When this movie was re-released. He's the last living cast member. He's 80 years old or something like that.
Did he have any perspectives on it at 80 years old that were interesting?
Well, I mean, it's not like he could remember the production all that well, but it was one of those things where I think he was amused.
Was he like, why is someone reaching out to me to talk about this movie?
I didn't reach out to him. As you know, guys like us, famous podcasters,
of course, yeah.
we get a lot of
just full.
We get a lot of PR emails all the time, most of which are shit. But one day I got a PR email offering an interview with the last living cast member from Robot Monster. And I think my eyes just about popped out of my head. It's like, yes, please.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
I've forgotten even what I'm talking about.
There is a crazy crew here. The guy who shot Reefer Madness, Jack Greenhale, is shooting this movie on dual strip polarized 3D.
The composer is Elmer Bernstein.
Oh my God! How have we not mentioned that
name? Success and The Great Escape.
Crazy.
Like fucking. Yeah.
That's crazy. I had no idea when I was watching.
The score's pretty good, actually.
That's what I'm saying. When I was watching it, I'm like, this actually sounds pretty professional and pretty good. And then I find out it's Elmer Bernstein. I'm like, that's an unbelievable that he did Robot Monster. Just incredible.
And just about Phil Tucker, I just want to say, I love Phil Tucker. I love all of his movies. I love Broadway Jungle, but he is one of the least talented directors of all time. And you watch this movie and it is so full of bizarre artistic decisions. When it comes to just being able to frame a shot, I don't think there's ever been anyone worse than Phil Tucker. It's incredible.
I mean, I don't think that there's a better way to frame a monster than in a wide shot where he waddles through some sort of desert.
Is
incredible.
It is incredible. It's funny because like nowadays when they use that for something that would be scary or a threat, it's almost like it's the distance is like what's coming towards you, so you have some time to think about it, but you know that death is imminent. But when you watch it and it's just a giant gorilla in the smallest fish tank like helmet that you've ever seen
with antennas like taped onto it.
Yeah, and I won't lie to you, the disproportionate body to the head and stuff does make this it's a little uncanny and weird looking. So but then it's also so silly. So it does have this very alien-like effect that it does look completely strange, but it's so funny. And so watching it from a distance, especially like approaching the children at
and he holds those shots for long enough that you're like, I'm meditating on.
This. He has travel moments where it's just like Roman going around the desert in his outfit, and it's hilarious. I mean, I absolutely adore it.
I do love Roman. I think everyone is going to come away from this. We love our pal Roman, and he has some wonderful lines. He's definitely giving the most like he's giving a performance, inside
the way
that
his
suit.
hand moves is incredible. I should just note that George Barrows, who plays Roman, he's notable because he was one of the 4 or 5 guys in Hollywood who had a gorilla suit. And so those guys were never without work. Like Ray Crash Corrigan is probably the most. Yeah, Ray Crash Corrigan is the other most famous one. And you look at George Barrows' filmography, and it's like, okay, he's in Gorilla at Large. He plays the gorilla. He's in a movie called The Adventures of Captain Africa. He plays the gorilla. Throughout the 60s, he's on episodes of The Addams Family, The Beverly Hillbillies, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Abbott and Costello Show, Hillbillies in a Haunted House. He's playing, the gorilla and all this stuff. He's on the Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk show as a gorilla. And, anyone who knows me knows I love guys in gorilla suits. And I think he's one of the all-time best.
Oh yeah, a natural. And I love the contrast between like the dumbest design of a big gorilla suit with the fish tank and then the most pseudo intelligent voice that they use, because it's so. And then of course the dialogue that they try to really amp up in the funniest way just by just using vocabulary that doesn't even seem to be suitable for the moment. It almost feels like the writer is trying to be.
Wyatt Ordung really had a way with words. Is how I what I came away with from this.
Absolutely. I was wondering too, because I was watching a Blu-ray remaster and everything. So I was curious if the introduction credits, where it's like overlaid over comic book posters and stuff, is the original thing as well, or if that was a new thing they just did for the introduction. That's
original. Movie. That's in the original film, and I don't quite understand it, but I like it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like a series of like weird sci-fi tales, like magazine. It's a bunch of those.
And what's weird too is that it even has in because I started looking at some, and it looked like they even had some like, I don't know if they were called Tales from the Crypt, but it almost looked like that's what they were doing. So it gave me this feeling that Phil Tucker had other films related to this, but I don't know if
he had a passion for science fiction. He probably liked all those those sci-fi magazines and serials, and the day the Earth stood still had just come out, Invaders from Mars had just come out, and he was like, I could do that.
Yeah, there's something about this movie that it's strange, where I do feel like there are legitimate comedic beats that he's trying to do, and then obviously there's the stuff that's just kind of silly, but it feels, if he's doing that introduction with the comic book, there's some aspects to this that I think he is being campy on purpose, but it obviously there's just such a cheap effect to it all that it still doesn't really give the excuse to do some of the stuff that he tries to get away with, like the bubble machine and all that, which I still love. There's a charm.
The bubble
to it,
machine is so fucking sick.
Every
time the bubble machine was going and they were talking about psychotronic vibrations, I was like, let's fucking go. This is exactly what I come to a movie like this for.
I mean, credit to Phil Tucker where it's due. This movie is better when you see it in 3D, because then the bubble machine makes sense. Like in 3D, it's like,
in the living room.
That's why he has the bubble machine. And actually, there's an early scene where the family is, setting the table for a picnic at this like rock quarry where they're at for some reason.
There's a lot of canyons and rocks and desert. The last, I couldn't quite tell. It's 5 to 8 people who are alive. I think we see 6 of them, but one of them dies and 2 are in a rocket ship that blows up.
That's right.
I was
trying to.
I believe so.
I was trying to piece this together. I found it a little confusing.
But that scene where they're putting out the picnic table, if you watch it in 2D, it seems like this completely like horrible composition for an incredibly boring, like 2-minute stretch of just setting a table. When you see it in 3D, you can tell that, Phil Tucker thought that the rocks would look cool in 3D and you would have stuff at all the planes of the frame. So yeah, seeing it in 3D is a bit of a revelation of like, every now and then Phil Tucker wasn't completely blind. Every now and then he would like figure out something that sort of made sense to do visually.
It is interesting that he'd have a mindset when he's setting up something where it's like everyone that watches this for the rest of time is going to see it in 3D specifically. So I'm going to set myself up like that. And it's obviously with certain things, this doesn't work. It is an interesting thought.
Phil Tucker, it's fine. You didn't know Blu-rays were going to exist.
Exactly. How are you to know?
I guess TV was around, and maybe you thought your movie would have played on TV at some point, but maybe there'd be 3D TVs by then. Who knows?
He thought he thoroughly thought like this was going to be a real I think any director that's releasing anything is going to think it's going to be a
footage
hit.
Though that doesn't make sense, right?
Well, I think the stock footage just was.
There's some Ed Woodian
it
stock footage in this of just like various films that were also like stop motion dinosaur fighting, and also a film that I need to watch where clearly they dressed up like lizards to look like dinosaurs and put them on a set and had them fight, which sounds like a horrible animal cruelty. But I was also like,
it's pretty
that's an
wild
interesting
footage.
way of doing it.
They're doing like 360 spins at each other. It's pretty nuts.
And that's what's Earth is. I actually don't exactly know why they show us that footage either. It's something to do with this is what Earth used to be, or this is what we're going to go back to.
Well, it's because they needed a little bit of spectacle. It's like it's a cheap movie with a guy in a gorilla suit like wandering around a canyon. It's like and he obviously got the cheapest footage he could find. Some of it comes from a movie called Lost Continent. I think another comes from a movie called 1 Million BC. There's a little bit of Invasion USA in there where you see New York get annihilated.
I was just gonna say I was curious with these little moments where it's like which ones were possibly stuff that he set up a miniature system and did it. Given that, but then I remember in the introduction it says like they had 4 days in one location and it was $16,000. So yeah, like even the miniature stuff is. So anyway, yeah.
So did you guys feel a little bit of an emotional attachment to Roman and the journey that he takes throughout this movie?
I did, but I have to say there was something about this movie where there's a brightness and a campiness to just that specific kind of 50s science fiction and the kind of optimism. And we've talked about it a lot on this show when we've talked about 50s sci-fi, but also they had a lot of obvious atomic anxiety. It was a really big thing, a really big subject of all of those movies. You couldn't really escape it. And so there was obviously an inherent kind of darkness to that. And that whiplash we've always kind of talked about. This one took it a step way further than I had experienced in this particular genre, because this is a strangely sexual movie. And it features pretty frank child murder.
Which I love.
Yes, we all support
not expecting
fuck them kids cinema around these parts. But it was just one of those things where I was shocked by the movie a little bit, despite the fact that there was nothing. Like, again, I think Roman is supposed to be this, a character who you're supposed to be scared of and you're eventually sympathetic to. And then you're eventually like, hey, he's turning against his robot masters and he loves humans now. But like partway through the movie, he just straight up strangles a girl to death. And I kind of went, well, okay, maybe Roman's got some demons that we need to work through before I can feel, all lovey-dovey about Mr. Roman.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that that's what they were doing, because it was again, there is like a campy tone to it, and even the way that he's threatening them and things like that, it doesn't feel entirely it doesn't feel like there's going to be this visceral moment of violence or anything. And when they kill the girl, although it is, I think, off screen and they find her, I just was not expecting them to actually show him grab the little girl, go off camera, and then they find her just completely limp bodied and dead. And
they bury her, and they have a scene of doing that. And I was like, Jesus.
It made me, and the thing is that it was so morbid compared to everything else that it makes you kind of laugh because of the insane contrast, but it's I don't know, it makes it incredibly memorable too, because I don't think I've ever seen a film that gave me this kind of a tone, and then all of a sudden there's like child murder, and then they go back to the kind of like the him discovering sex and discovering humanity with Alice, and him being attracted to Alice, and it's just that back and forth really took me.
And the family has a really bizarre dynamic I couldn't quite figure out, where like one of them is like a professor and one of them is his assistant, but then the professor, I guess it's his wife, and Alice is his daughter, and are all of them his children? He seemed a little old to be having young children like that. I don't know. I was very confused.
I think they're a kind of like surrogate family. They're a found family that has come together in this post-apocalyptic hellscape. And I mean, because
they're all immune to the death ray, right? That's the for some reason.
That's right. And obviously there's the romance between George Nader and Claudia Barrett, which it's so powerful to see that come together, because
I mean, it's red hot. That dude is completely shirtless and rolling around in the tall grass with her.
I'm going to get to that because I love that scene. But I love that when we first meet the two of them together, in the dream, spoiler, almost all the movie's a dream sequence. When we meet them, which is such a cop out, but whatever. When we meet them in the dream sequence, they're kind of like
by the end. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, that's right. George Nader and Claudia Barrett are sort of bickering. There's some kind of like battle of the sexes stuff of like, oh, you may be a scientist, but you're still a damn woman, that kind of stuff. And then there's that odd shot of the two of them, like it's a close up of them with some tools, like working on some.
They're like connecting circuits or something.
Yeah. And he's holding like a screwdriver, and he's like, oh, you're going to want to lube this up or something. And I'm thinking, is that sexual? Should I be thinking that way? And I think it's supposed to be. I actually think you're supposed to think that.
Yeah.
And then he says words to her, something like, yeah, he doesn't exactly say this, but he's like, oh, pretty soon you got to be in the damn kitchen because you're a woman. And she's like, you're a pretty manly man. How about we finish sorting out this thing and then we can have sex, basically. Like she
says we can play later.
That's right.
Literally uses the word play. So you're like, well, what else are two adults doing? They're not building Legos,
Yeah. So the two of them, the jump from them being a sort of bickering battle of the sexes, Tracy and Hepburn duo, to them, macking on each other is so quick and so abrupt. And then later on, when the two of them in this weird silent movie footage are like frolicking in a field and like pantomiming romance to each other, that's one of those scenes where you just want to ask Phil Tucker, like, what the hell were you thinking? And in that scene, when they're in the brush, like the George Nader character is like bleeding from his ear. There's a big trickle of blood that I guess from an action scene that had just happened. But it looks like earwax, basically. It looks like something's fucking coming out of his ear.
That whole sequence is so bizarre, because that's the one where when I think Roman first is sort of like hunting for them, and they spot him in the distance in a way that he should obviously see them. And he does like a weird, like bumbling, like Jason, like in a Friday the 13th movie thing, where he just kind of looks the other way and they don't see him. But Roy picks Alice up when they could have easily ran together just fine, but he like slows it down to be like, I'm a shirtless man who's going to pick up this woman and I'm going to protect her. And then when they hide, that's when they have that really like hand gesture, silent, sort of like romance in the grass that they have. And the thing that baffled me about that entire stretch, they return back to the house. And the kids remark about, oh, have you guys been like playing house out there? Like wink, wink. And, they're like, we're going to get married. And the father declares it the biggest social event of the year for the whole community. They're going to have this big wedding for everyone. And I was sitting there going, the kids make a huge thing about whether he's going to play house with his sister or not. And they keep referencing it. And I was like, is that what playing house is? That they're referencing that they were going out into the field and they were having sex? Because that's very inappropriate for those children to be talking about. And they should be playing Alien versus Spaceman, which is what the little boy is doing for the actual movie in his dream and all of that.
Yeah.
One of the first lines that he comes up to her is fairly funny, where he just goes, "Bang, you're disintegrated." I just liked how it was violent right away. It was just very funny to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and the professor and George are the ones who are like, wouldn't it be nicer if we could all just have peace with each other? Why do you guys need to have violent, fantasies? And that's why his dream is all violent too. So it all makes sense when you think about it.
Absolutely.
I like the professor as a presence, the Germanic accent and all that. I think he's a very strong presence. I agree with you. I like the child death subcurrent of the movie, and I especially like that when they've buried the little girl. I think the professor says something like, "We enjoyed her while we had her," which is like, I hope they say that at my funeral too. We enjoyed him while we had him,
No regrets, Sonny. We have to find a way to live without her,
Oh my God.
And he has just such an incredible accent. Like he's delivering it in what's that Western that we watched, Jamie, where it was the dude from Doctor Strangelove playing like a Swedish guy. That's kind of the voice it sounds like.
It's like Little something like Terror on Little Prairie Town or something.
No,
like
yeah,
that.
it was Sterling Hayden, and it was Terror in a Texas Town. That's what I was thinking of.
That's the one. Yeah, totally. Because he does the thing where he was like, he calls himself Roman, like it's Roman or whatever, but he goes Roman, and then he calls all the humans human. Like there's like a specific way that he does it consistently. So it's designed for him to talk like that, which I thought was fun.
It's so good. Every the way that he exaggerates the Beatitudes when he's doing the prayer at their wedding and everything. Every line delivery he gets is absolutely fantastic.
I love when he does that one point. He goes like, and I have it written down somewhere, but he's like, he's talking to the commander. And this is like, the dialogue has a bunch of this stuff where they over explain things even to characters that don't need it. He's talked to this commander about the Ray 1,000 times at this point, and he's still doing the thing where he's just like, the CRA, the Calvernator Ray, like just to like do the comma to explain what he just said in the acronym. And you're like, you're talking to the commander, and this is the 5th time that you've explained it. It's just, they have a ton of that kind of
George Barrows has a lot of conversations with himself in this movie, that's for sure, as Roman and the great guidance, right? That's what he seems to constantly refer to him as, who's the guy on the other end of the call who has the better computator. Who has more accurate and senses the marginal life that they have yet to destroy. And because they're immune to the death ray, that's why he has to destroy it through physical means. And multiple times he's just like, yeah, you need to just strangle children. Like, I don't know how many times I have to tell you this. We're not coming there, and we're not like colonizing Earth until you have strangled every child on the planet. There's only 2. Like,
so get to them. Get to it, dude.
Chop, man. Like,
I like that.
I also love they've destroyed the entire human race except for these 6 people who are like 20 feet away from Roman's lair. Yeah. And it takes him forever to locate them.
At one point, I think it's hilarious that he goes like, he video calls them at the beginning, and he's like, hey, look, if you just come to me so I don't have to do any of the work, it'll be painless, but just please come to me so I don't have to go look for you. It's just like stuff like that. I think is hilarious. I really love the when the family, and they do these things, and there's a couple moments where it's like it tries to build like sentimental moments and these like human moments. And one of them is when the professor introduces his whole family to the commander and Roman individually, so that they can be like, this is who they are. This is who they are as people. You shouldn't kill them if you get,
this is Carla, this is Johnny, this is Alice. And all of a sudden you get Roman being like, oh, could you show Alice again?
Dude, that is the funniest shit. He's just like, wait, I don't understand what's going on, but the one they call Alice, I really want to see
what
her
a
again.
Babe.
Yeah. There's this, this is so funny. I don't know who this is. It's on Letterboxd here. It's one of the popular reviews, and I just thought this was so funny. The review is, a space gorilla with its head stuck in a fishbowl terrorizes mankind with a bubble machine until he finds out about pussy. Yeah. And I just thought that was unbelievably hilarious, because as soon as Alice comes into it, he's just like, maybe humans are good, come back to my cave.
My favorite part of his crisis is that he has this big crisis of consciousness. You know, he doesn't want to kill humans anymore, and he goes on this, you know, at one point kind of moving monologue where he's like, you know, to laugh and feel and want, why are these things not in our plan? Like, as robots, like, the humans are doing something right here, and I want to be part of that. And, you know, so I see what he's going for, but there's this, it's a crisis of conscience also baked around the fact that he clearly just wants to have sex with this woman. And at one point, after he kidnaps her, and there's this hilarious physical comedy sequence of him trying to tie her up and then getting tired of, like, you know, he can't like make it work, so he just smacks her unconscious, and then she ends up tied up later anyway somehow in the continuity. But he does that, and he asks her, suppose that, like, I was a man, would you treat me like a man? Like, would you have sex with me the same way that you have sex with your shirtless hunk over there? And like, that's clearly what he's more interested in, that he's like, this is just a beautiful woman. And, you know, he does end up just being like, you know what? Okay, I can't kill this woman, but I can go kill the other child.
I'll go kill the little girl instead.
Yeah. And so the crisis of conscience is just so incredibly funny, because it's literally just, you know, a crisis of killing a beautiful woman, which we've all been there. You know, I hate seeing... Every time I watch a Giallo film, I'm like, look at these beautiful Italian women. How could a filmmaker possibly do these things to them? They're all horrible, horrible people. So I connect with Roman on that level. And the other thing that's weird about that relationship that legitimately kind of shocked me was the sequence of events where Alice hears the pitch, where she's just like, look, I will meet your demands, and I will have negotiations with humankind, but it will be with just Alice alone. And that's it. And they all go, well, no, you can't do that. Like, we clearly know what he's interested in. And she like volunteers to be like Roman's sex slave in order to continue mankind. Like, she literally does that to them and is like, I don't have time for a doting father or a jealous suitor. I am willing to degrade myself with Roman for the good of mankind, which is incredibly brave. But it was also, again, just another incredibly dark detail that the implications of are horrifying.
Yeah. I love to, like, the shot. They do these blunt line deliveries that I don't think would be as funny if they just didn't have these setups before them, like with how long it takes them for someone to stop in the middle of the shot and then say the line. It just feels like they should have edited out certain things to make it work better. But it ends up, again, with this kind of comedic effect where one of them is when the little boy comes up and he finds Roman, and he's just kind of like, you're a bully, and just calls him all this stuff. And then
he tries to right away him, and it doesn't work.
But the line I thought was from Roman is so funny. The little kid's like, you're a bully, and he just goes, now I will kill you. And the bluntness of it makes me laugh every time. And he does that same thing to the little girl when he finds the little girl in the field. And he even does it to Alice when he's holding her right before he takes her to the cave and just says, now I will kill you. And just the bluntness of it made me laugh every fucking time. It was so funny.
There's incredible dialogue. Alice remarking upon how strong and awesome Roman is, while briefly being scared in his arms and like kicking her feet while he's like carrying her around, just a guy in a gorilla costume.
Yeah,
it's great.
Also, like, we were talking about the kid death, and it's so wild because the way that they present it, like, it is kind of funny at first because they're just in the field, and then he just kind of grabs her and takes her off the screen as she like kicks. And it's very just silly, and it's just a simple pickup and out of the shot. And then when you just see her limp body, you're like, oh my God, that's what it resulted in? I thought he was going to like take her to the cave and like, you know, Roy would save the day at a certain point or whatever it is. And it's just the bluntness of that was insane. But then in contrast, they start to try to make like these more meaningful and writerly lines. Like, my absolute favorite is when he's starting to realize that, you know, humanity is maybe worth saving, and that he has maybe some inside him as well, that now that he's grown to understand them, and he's told to destroy everybody or be destroyed. And he goes, this is my favorite line of the whole movie. He goes, I cannot, yet I must. How do you calculate that? At what point in the graph do must and cannot meet? That is
beautiful.
Fucking
poetry.
Shakespearean.
Oh, beautiful
Poetry. Me and my brother rewound that, I think 10 times. I'm not exaggerating. We just kept we couldn't wrap our heads around the line. It was just like, it was so unbelievably stupid and beautiful at the same time. And yeah, genius.
And George Barrows.
Oh man.
It. Yeah, but that and honestly, I feel like we're talking in circles a bit, but like that's the rest of the movie. It is a guy in a gorilla costume walking around a canyon, angrily like smacking various like dead tree branches and stuff like that, while Elmer Bernstein just going fucking crazy on the keys and the orchestra.
There is a moment where I don't, maybe you mentioned it, Josh, but the specific of it where there's actually kind of like a sexual assault, like 2 seconds of one where he almost tries to pull down Alice's shirt and then it stops and then it doesn't continue from there. But I was even shocked by that they threw that in there just compared to everything else.
We will assume that Roman just did not know human mating rituals yet, and we will protect his character for the time being. Because he's a pure soul. He may be going beast mode on children, but he is he
was propagandized, man. He thought,
he was programmed to be this way and to do this stuff. And maybe the grandma is sobbing at a fucking a cross tombstone where the old man is going, "No regrets, Sonny. We have to find a way to live without little Carla." And you're just like, I don't know why this movie is making me think about the morality of what Roman is doing. It does lead to an incredible sequence of events where little boy Johnny is the one who formulates the plan to trick Roman into essentially thinking they're all going to give up themselves in the canyon. So he'll go there and then sneaking into his cave and saving Alice while he does that, even though he's like, don't have time for that. Call me again later. And then he goes, okay, maybe I will meet you in the canyon. And then he leaves and, the grandparents sneak in and kind of go get her. And I think they arm Johnny with like the fake like laser blaster, or is that supposed to be the gun? Because I know the old guy does talk about having a gun to commit suicide with at one point too. And I was this movie is blowing my mind.
I forgot it had that in it. That is a dark detail.
I mean, it's LA wasteland. It's just accurate. I guess you gotta be ready. You gotta be ready for anything. But it ends up building to this finale here where Roman is again having this crisis of conscience that will not prevent him from stomping over and killing the boy on order, which the second he does, obviously the parents go in and sort of free her and destroy his sort of radio transmission device. And then while in the process of killing the boy, Great Guidance seems to like try to like kill everybody. And you get the stock footage kind of comes in and he's talking about psychotronic vibrations again. But as we've been alluding to through the episode, everything's fine. Turns out it was all a dream Johnny had after this falling in a canyon and bumping his head. And, everyone is back to just being like, Johnny, you have a weirdo little imagination in your head. And, maybe science fiction shouldn't be so violent. And you think everything's fine, but then Roman walks out of that goddamn cave and you're like, holy fuck, Roman is real. And he's among us.
Can we also include the detail that for some reason he walks into the into the camera 3 times for no reason? I really enjoyed that.
I think paired with the Elmer Bernstein music, it's incredibly powerful. I think it makes emotional sense, if not any other kind of sense.
It's like when you show an explosion like 3 times and,
he's reverberating.
The spectacle impact. Yeah.
He's echoing through time. I agree. That's how I'm choosing to read it.
Yeah.
Because it's so funny because the beat would be, and I was seeing it coming. They pan to the right of the cave. He's in the cave. We all saw that coming. The fade out 3 time into the camera is just it was a choice, and I think I agree.
And Phil Tucker made it. What an artist!
Yeah, and Phil Tucker made it. Yeah.
I'd like to note about Phil Tucker that after this incredible run of movies in the 50s, which climaxed with 1960s Cape Canaveral Monsters, which I highly recommend, a little more dreamlike than this film, I would say, possibly even more Spartan. in the 70s, he actually had a successful career in post-production in Hollywood. He became a sort of editor and sort of like doctor to movies. He worked on, among other films, the 1976 remake of King Kong, the Dino De Laurentiis version. So, I mean, from Roman to King Kong himself, what an evolution in terms of
Dino saw Robot Monster and just said, "This is the man. This is the man we need."
This man knows gorillas.
He knows exactly.
He also edited a movie called The Nude Bomb in 1980.
Yeah, the Nude Bomb, which was a feature film spinoff of the 60s TV show Get Smart. So he edited that film. So, hats off to him. I don't think he had quite the same artistic highs as Ed Wood, but he became a more durable figure in the industry than Ed Wood did.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe Ed Wood had a point in his book then. I guess maybe he was more of a cynical huckster than Ed Wood was. That man stayed an artist for his whole life, as we know.
Yeah.
Never strayed away from the vision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if we're maybe pivoting towards reductive rating on Robot Monster, it's going to get a nice little three and a heart from me over here. I had an enjoyable time with it. I have seen enough Atomic Anxiety, post-apocalyptic, sort of sci-fi B movies from the 50s to, kind of see what it is that he's going for. And also, like all of the most and best enjoyably, notoriously, quote unquote, bad movies, there's a lot of cheap, weirdo creativity behind this movie that is very amusing. Sometimes it's stilted, sometimes it's confusing, sometimes you're like, why is that stock footage shot in there, and what does it mean? What does that cut do? Why did they say that line that way? These are many questions you have watching a movie by Ed Wood or a Phil Tucker type, but I can see that there is an artist behind this saying something, and maybe it's Wyatt Ordung, who wrote an incredibly strange movie about a sympathetic robot who kills and maybe tries to sexually assault all of the humans he loves. So you might feel weird about that, but the actors are giving it. George Nader is shirtless and being a hunk. Claudia Barrett is being a beautiful damsel. Gregory Moffat is being an annoying child who gets murdered. George Barrows is doing double duty as two gorilla men in diving helmets with antennas on them, and he is believable as two different gorilla men in diving helmets.
What an actor.
There you go. That's enough. Range. He has some very incredibly comedic physical beats and lines. He also has some weirdly moving bits, like the poetic line that Jamie was talking about, but also begging for things to feel and want, and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know. There's again a genuinely strange amount of dark sexual and child murder content in this bright and cheery and campy 50s sci-fi movie that I was not for a single second of its 60 minutes, including an intermission, bored. And I can say that there's a lot of 50s B movies I've seen where I've been like, let's get on with it, and this was not one of them. So I liked it.
I'm honestly, I think I'm in the strong 3 territory. I had so much fun with this. My brother and I were
so close. Jamie could upgrade it and give it the same rating as Ed Wood.
Same as Ed Wood, yeah.
We're so close.
We are so close, guys. It's unreal. I had a blast. I don't know what else to say. Like, obviously the film has its very obvious issues, but there's something so fascinating about when someone pulls off is a strong phrase there, but when someone has this kind of specific tone that they're trying to catch, which feels very campy a lot of the time, and into that kind of that almost comic booky science fiction serial thing, and then yet he sprinkles in like the kind of the sexual assault stuff with Roman, the child murders, obviously just the whole thing of like humanity being wiped out entirely. But just there's moments in this that really feel completely separate in tone from the majority of it. And when those hit, they just throw you back. There's such a whiplash effect that does create, I think, mostly comedy. And I don't think, all of this is intentionally supposed to be a comedy, but I do think there are parts of it that seem to be written or at least timed comedically. And I enjoy those moments too. But really, the things I think that shine are the accidental moments. So it's hard for me to sit here and give something, like a 4 when I know a lot of it was kind of on accident, just based on taste and based on these.
Don't say that in front of Mr. Will here. Mr. Will is like,
hey, I'm not disrespecting Phil Tucker by any means. If that's what you're trying to imply.
No. I was just saying, Will, that man, he will five the most accidental piece of art that's ever existed.
Well, see, that's the thing. I've talked about it on the show a bunch, but I do get a little cross sometimes where I'm like, how much does intention really matter? I feel like as we do this show, I think it lessens every single year for me, to be honest with you. And but there's still some moments that I fight with it. And again, I would probably feel bad if I gave this a 4 and also Ed Wood a 4. But there's some just awesome stuff in here. Like, I like the whole Roman becoming a human. I think that's very fun, and
the fact that we've had to say it that way every single time is a testament to how funny it is in the movie.
Yeah, just that little choice honestly gives it a character all on its own, and it's such a dumb little thing, but I don't know, I had a blast with it. I think that also Claudia Barrett, there's this one moment, and I don't know what she's saying in the dialogue, but it's something about like fighting for humanity and love and all of that, but she's doing this like the 40s transatlantic fast talking kind of performance, and it's really the only time I think that the dialogue allows a character to do it, but she just goes for it, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a moment in the camp somewhere, but I thought that she was pretty good at going for it. It's a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit overdone, I would say, in the performance, but again, I just love the commitment. So yeah, a strong 3. I honestly think I will be revisiting this just to show some friends when we're all getting baked or drinking or something. So
for you, Will.
Well, I mean, obviously, I want to give it 5, but I'll restrain myself and give it 4.
Hell yeah, love it.
And I think it's a movie that is full of very strange decisions, not just in terms of the camera compositions and the technical aspects, but also in the storytelling. The evolution of Roman's character is so bizarre. The fact that he sort of reveals himself at some point in the movie as being a sort of proto-incel type, and that speech that he delivers, to be like the human, to laugh, that speech. It's at that it's at that ecstatic like intersection of being hilarious, but then also I like, in the context of this movie, I kind of feel it. Like I've come to love this character, and I've come to want this for him too, even in this ridiculous movie. And so for all those feelings and more, this gets a strong 4 for me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's coming, Will. I feel my 4-star rating for Robot Monster is coming one day.
That's
and
right.
I'll email you.
I'm just glad you both liked this movie. I feel like on my earlier appearances, I maybe led you guys down some dark alleys. So, I showed you movies that I personally found fascinating that like no rational human would. So I'm glad you enjoyed this.
No, that's exactly what we wanted of you. I mean, first year of the show, you were like, you named your show Sleazoids. We are talking about Widow Blue. We knew exactly what you were going to provide every time you came on, and it's why you will. We will keep inviting you on because that's exactly what we want. But yeah, it's two weeks of being sort of like challenged by this kind of thing. Because I mean, Perry brought After last season on, and that was the one that I feel like Jamie felt so bad about not liking. Whereas I felt like
I did not
was
like
more down his alley.
Yeah, this is perfect. I love this shit. I mean, I already get the campiness of it, but then you get kind of the unintentional quality of it all. I do
love that the lizard made the poster.
Yeah, they're like, this shot's actually pretty sick, even though it's not one that we did.
That shouldn't be allowed. That's ridiculous.
The stock footage that we grabbed. Oh man, funny.
But yeah, I think that is gonna wrap it up for Robot Monster here, and for this week's episode. That was again Ed Wood from 1994 and Robot Monster from 1953. Will, thanks so much for joining us and for bringing these films on. And once again, everyone, please go pre-order the book. Pre-ordering the book is hugely helpful, and it's sure going to be filled with incredible nuggets of information about Ed Wood that you are going to want to have. But is there anything else people should know about the book, or any other things you want to promote while you're here, Will?
Well, thanks so much. And I should just say that if you pre-ordered the book from the publisher or books, it should be shipping by the end of the month. That is June. That's the month we're in, right? June of 2025.
Correct.
And then, yeah, that's right. And then it will be in bookstores on October 10th of this year to coincide with Ed Wood's 101st birthday. And you may be wondering, why October and not the previously announced date of July? Well, I'm happy to say that it's because the pre-orders have been pretty good so far, so the publisher wants a little bit more time to promote it. So that, I guess that falls under the category of good problems to have. So if you're waiting for it from your local bookstore, you may have to wait a little bit. You'll have to wait till October. But if you pre-order it from the publisher, you'll get it very soon. And if you pre-order from the publisher, I get more money. So, I mean, win-win. What can I tell you?
Hell yeah.
There you go.
And also, writing a book is the least lucrative thing you can do. So, for the amount of work you put into it to the amount of money you get out of it. Why not order from the publisher?
Revelations from the man who's read every Ed Wood novel.
Yeah.
That man did not end up making a ton of money out of it, but hopefully that will change. Will is changing things. Everyone go buy the book, please. Yes. It's going to be amazing. For our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time where, what are we doing here? I'm looking this up. Oh yeah, we are going to be going zombie mode because there is a 28 years later movie coming out. We are breaking the rules again to talk about 28 days later, but also an excuse because, we haven't talked about it. And I know that, both Garland and Boyle basically say, Night of the Living Dead was kind of like huge thing for them, but we've never talked about the 90s Night of the Living Dead, the remake by Tom Savini. So we're going to use that excuse to be able to talk about two zombie movies that we wanted to do. That's what we're going to be doing next week over on the Patreon. And then in 2 weeks' time, I actually don't think we have the episode 100% set in stone. I think two guests are fighting each other to the death, sort of like the two lizards in Robot Monster on who's going to get that episode. So we will tease the episode after that, just to give you that. For the Patreon in the week after, we are going to be tying into the new Jurassic Park movie by going to the first ever dinosaur movie feature length, The Lost World. Which I'm kind of excited. So speaking of stop motion dinosaurs appearing in Robot Monster, we're also going to be talking about that over on the Patreon shortly. So look forward to that. But that's, I think, going to wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.